A few months after the divorce, my ex texted, "We need to talk. Urgent." I wrote back, "Not anymore. It would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe, before we begin." When I stepped foot in our Elmhurst home, it was somewhat after 7:15. Down and out, no signal. Still no response from the investor. In anticipation of hearing the television's hum or the kitchen's clink of a wine glass, I set my laptop bag down beside the entrance. On the contrary, I discovered Charlotte in the living room, methodically stuffing a suitcase with garments. She remained oblivious. My question, "Are you going somewhere?" was low volume but audible enough to break the stillness. Without showing any fear, she closed the suitcase's zipper. "Hi Ethan, I'm looking for a divorce." My pupils dilated. "Excuse me?" At last, we locked gazes. Not furious, not sad, simply emotionless. Seemed like she had gotten over it and neglected to inform me. "Why?" I inquired, attempting to absorb the impact. "You choose at a time when everything is crumbling," Charlotte remarked. Crossing her arms, she stood. "Very much so. I require an item that is not disintegrating." I felt a thump 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 in my chest. "Then you should just grab a bag and run away from your husband as he drowns." "Ethan, I am not your lifeguard. You bet it all on a tech fantasy that never came true. You have changed since we were married. Are you referring to the guy who settled your student loans? For 4 years, who helped fund your art studio?" That was it. A knot formed in her jaw. "Let the past be forgotten." I remarked that it was all about the past. We all understood this venture would be a huge challenge. I told her that you were at my side when I took that chance. She averted her gaze and ran her fingers through her hair. "A guy with promise was with me. A dead idea is all you're holding on to now." The words were devastating. "Do you have a date?" I inquired. Condensation set in. For a split second, Charlotte did not move. Not long enough to be sure, but also not long enough to be comfortable. At last, she managed to say no. "Surprising," I murmured as I paced. "You just hang around until my bank account is about to collapse, when I'm just one legal notice away from being bankrupt, and then you disappear." Silence eluded her. Pursuant to the entrance, she rolled her travel bag. "I refuse to beg," I declared. "Go ahead and go if this is your identity." Her hand rested on the knob as she waited. "I had a feeling you wouldn't." She departed thereafter. Just the gentle sound of the door closing behind her. No sobs, no embraces, no goodbye remarks. Standing in the center of the room, encircled by all that we had constructed, was myself. Like a lease that had just expired, she had just walked away from it all. The night before, the stillness seemed as sharp as teeth. I refused to take a seat. A scream eluded me. I refrained from giving in since a new force was already establishing itself within me. A marriage wasn't the only thing that ended here. It seemed like a new chapter was about to begin. The lights were left off. I plopped myself down in the weathered leather sofa beside the hearth, the one she insisted belonged in the family room but which I had always thought was too manly. Between the little light from the microwave clock and the outside street light, the room was only partially illuminated. I sat there, with my jacket on, staring at nothing for quite some time. I got to my feet, made my way to the kitchen, and unscrewed the cabinet atop the refrigerator. I retrieved the bottle of blended whiskey that I had stashed away for an eventuality that never materialized. A little pop escaped the cork. A home that was suddenly too large for a single person made the cacophony seem unbearable. A glass wasn't necessary. Going back to the recliner, I poured myself a slow drink from the bottle. There wasn't enough fire. "Feel free to take another sip." The ideas began to solidify around the fourth pour. The jumbled bits of humiliation, frustration, and memories that had been rattling about in my brain started to fall into place. Instead of feeling like a rocket about to blast off, the startup started to feel like an animal on its last legs. In the midst of anxious investor calls and restless nights, I persisted in attempting to revive it. The emails that I preferred not to read greeted me as soon as I picked up my phone. "Rejecting your suggestion, our investment vehicle is changing directions. Last word. Excellent total. I will not be available tonight." As I reclined, I whispered, "Maybe she's right." The words had a rusty flavor. Even though it was only the house settling, the sound of a floorboard creaking in the hallway seemed like a response. I preferred not to be inebriated. I preferred not to feel sharp. A fingertip lingered over Charlotte's phone number. That was not me. In its place, I accessed the photo album and perused a hazy selfie taken in the hospital hallway during my dad's passing, as well as a birthday dinner weekend at Lake Geneva. At one point, I was so moved that I cried out loud as she rested her head on my shoulder. After staring at the phone for what seemed like an eternity, I finally locked it and threw it onto the coffee table. Once again, the sound of the clocks ticking above the mantel echoed throughout the room. "Tick tick tick," I said calmly. She crossed a boundary when she said, "I'm not begging, Charlotte." She hadn't merely departed out of necessity. The reason she departed was her own choice. Soiled hands in a bag, no argument, no explanation. I wasn't even gripped by sadness. I felt insulted. The gradual kind that nibbles at your flesh and causes pain. I'd offered her the world. Sundays, late night calls, and the ubiquitous "I'll be home late" texts. As I sipped whiskey that she used to keep hidden from visitors in the house we bought together, I tried not to feel like the world had cast me off of the island. Still, I would not perish in the water. I refused to give in on Wednesday morning, regardless of the severity of the storm, the treachery, or the quiet. Upon entering the office, I noticed that the rain had not stopped. The city felt like it was covered in a gray tarp due to the gentle, steady rain. Silence filled the lobby, just the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, no one to answer the phone or make deliveries. I reached the 7th floor by taking the elevator. My own footsteps echoed as the doors swung open. Displaced workstations, unplugged monitors, and the intern table left the office looking quite deserted. A smudge of long-forgotten ideas remained on the whiteboard that had served as our travel map. At one end of the room, with his sleeves rolled up and wearing the same gray hoodie he wore when things were tight, Ryan sat slumped over a mug. As soon as I entered, he glanced down. My suitcase fell on the floor as I strode over. A simple "Charlotte left" was all I gave. Ryan blinked slowly, as if he hadn't gotten any rest. Assembled a travel bag and asked, "What? She's gone? Heard her say she wants a breakup." I remember that night vividly. He remained motionless for an instant. He proceeded to massage the nape of his neck. "Man, I'm sorry, that's rough. I thought you two were solid." "Yeah, me too," I said softly. We fell into a long period of quiet. After that, Ryan drew back his hands and met my intense gaze. "I've been meaning to talk to you," stated the man. The words "I'm considering leaving the company" made my gut knot up. "You're what?" "I want to cash out my stake," he informed me. "With everything slowing, the funding drying up, I think it's time. I've got an offer. Product director at a fintech, more stable. It's a lifeboat." He looked at me. "Yes, I did say that." Ryan was unmoved. "We put a lot of effort into this, but it's failing. Market conditions changed. The window was passed by us. Because I helped build the ship, it doesn't mean I have to go down with it." Silently, I remarked that you had always claimed we were partners. Fluffy and hefty. "You informed me of it when we signed the lease." He stated that he meant it. "However, this does not involve any kind of emotional feelings." I stated that it is the issue. It ought to be. "Get up," he said. "I will prepare the necessary documents. My stake is going to you. All I want is to be clean." After grabbing his coat, he halted at the entrance and uttered, "Take care of yourself, before striding out. First, Ryan, and then Charlotte." Like everything else I had lost, the structure I was standing in felt empty. A divorce hearing was scheduled for a few months down the road. Somber and drab was the courthouse. Charcoal, the only respectable suit I own, was a tad snugger than it had been before. Despite my weight loss, it was insignificant. Already there, poised and ready, was Charlotte. With the self-assurance of an hourly worker, her lawyer sat next to her, confidently turning pages. Attorney for Charlotte took the stand first when the court referred to the matter. "Your Honor, Mrs. Harlow is entitled to half of all marital assets, including equity in Mr. Harlow's business. That company was built during the marriage. Divorce was something I preferred not to do." I spoke up before my attorney could even think about it. "I will not be challenging the divorce, Your Honor. Let's not make this last forever. Charlotte can have the house and the car if I want to. Please, just hold on to the company, whatever that may be. Repair or bury it is within my purview." A halt followed. The judge's eyebrow arched. "The appraisal reveals a considerable decline." My response was, "Yes, ma'am," and she agreed. Astonished, Charlotte's lawyer said, "We're down to almost nothing, but it's mine to rebuild." Then he said yes to the offer. I glanced over at Charlotte as I prepared to leave the bench, and the judge took note of it. I yelled out, "Thank you," to the point where everyone in the room could hear me. I would have preferred a different ending to the years we were together. Her silence was deafening. The court rejected our case. I left with no bruises or rips. Not weaker, not lighter, but whole. From time to time, that suffices. For the 5 days following the hearing, I made do with my automobile. In the back seat, I folded my clothing. A file cabinet and a laptop bag were one and the same. I stayed at a friend's house in Naperville for 3 nights. A strange night's sleep at the home of a former coworker. My pride had nowhere else to go. After that, Ava Harlow's message. "Cole, my younger sister, has always been the reserved one at family meals, but I've heard about everything. If you ever need a somewhere to rest, my couch is open. I'm in Joliet. No pressure." She used to slip a letter under the table and write, "You're the only reason these dinners are tolerable." I saved the note. I was slow to respond. Typing it took me nearly 2 hours. "Is that so?" "Without a doubt," she responded within a minute. On a peaceful block, her apartment was located above a flower shop. There was a subtle cinnamon aroma. There was a pillow on her blanket-covered couch already. She said, "You look like a man who's either heartbroken or recently mugged." As soon as I stepped into the room, a combination of the two, and I grinned. She returned from her day as an elementary school art teacher reeking of glue and paint. We started to move in unison. I did my job at the kitchen table. Both the calls and the answers were brief. While humming, Ava bobbed in and out, dripping coffee. Her expression was one of understanding, not sympathy. I finally spoke up what had been bothering me one night while she was doing the dishes. I understand how strange it is to be caring for your sister's ex-boyfriend, but this isn't your problem, Ava. She remained oblivious. According to her, you are not considered Charlotte's ex. Then what do I even mean? I inquired. After washing her hands, she rested her torso against the basin. Everyone remembers you, Ethan, as the one who never missed a family cookout. My former roommate who helped me pack up and leave my dorm. They were the ones who made fun of my dreadful jokes and remarked on how charming my clay mugs were. That response was unassuming and unremarkable. Time elapsed. So, the business made it. One of our software's mid-sized logistics clients gambled on it. 3 and then 9 figures ended up in that arrangement. Reassurance gradually returned. Upon opening my laptop one morning, I beheld it. We cleared 7 figures. Our initial material gain. Many minutes were lost in staring at the screen. Suddenly, Ava yelled out from the kitchen. Is it a guy whose diet no longer includes quick noodles? I made a joke about how that man's face looked like it could belong on a table that wasn't found on Craigslist. I scheduled a rooftop meal for that evening. A burgundy sweater dress and her splurge boots were on display. Flatbread and hot cider were shared. Midway through my statement, I glanced over at her and spoke the words, I love you. There was no dramatic pause. Absence of practice. I told Ava that I loved her. Not due to your actions, but to your character. A wide grin spread across her face as her lips parted in a playful expression. I've been patiently waiting for you to make that statement, she murmured secretly. After that, progress was made in a low-key manner. Instead of dozing off on the couch, I finally got a real bed. The drawers were back in my belongings. Together, we were a gentle and steady couple. After then, memories began to resurface. Charlotte swung into the office one late afternoon, her pale, crimson eyes framed by a windstorm. She remained silent. With a weak voice, she spoke about Ethan. Like I was greeting a client, I pointed to the chair across from me. Relaxed, stable, just barely, she sat. I made a mistake, she muttered in a low voice. Silence eluded me. She stared at me, her expression one of pure terror. According to her, it was Ryan. Things began to fall apart while we were already involved. You were fading away, he informed me. His claim was that he could rescue the business. Claiming to bring clients, he proceeded. I didn't doubt him. I clenched my teeth. Staying hands-free was my priority. He drained it, she whispered. He redirection leads. I discovered I had gotten too deep in while he was quietly consulting on the side. I felt it was important for you to hear me out before the case goes to court. I took note. Charlotte, you didn't destroy everything on your own, but you abandoned me just when I needed you most, I remarked, and she started to cry. I loved you, she said behind closed doors. Replying, I believe you, she said. Her shoulders drooped as she rose up and said, you loved yourself more. She promised that Ava would be nice to her. Instead of responding, I just said, I can see that. With her hand still on the doorknob, she turned to slip out. Again, she apologized. Silence eluded me. With her back to the door, it shut silently. Olivia Bennett, a lawyer I knew, was contacted 4 days later. After giving it some thought, she finally said, meet me Tuesday. By Thursday, she had a solid case. Ryan had used a shell firm to steal clients and send out duplicate bills, according to the evidence. What was missing was filled in by Charlotte's admission. Silent and merciless was the suit. Sitting across from me was Ryan, who was wearing an overly snug blue suit. With all the composure of a man, I made my way to the bench. He was betrayed more than I was, I told him. After an hour of reviewing the documents, the judge said, you hurt the clients, the interns who never got paid, the people who trusted us. Next, the gavel shattered. Ryan's business would foot the bill in full. For 7 years, he could not establish any additional businesses in the state. His driver's license was revoked. Pride was not something I indulged in. Outside the courts, I did nothing but stand. Someone rang my phone. The news reached Ava, this makes me proud. I'll pay for dinner. Like little sparks on parched grass, clients began to call back. While Ava went grocery shopping on a peaceful Saturday afternoon, I sipped my coffee on the patio. Someone gently tapped on the door. Prior to opening it, I had a feeling it was Charlotte. Her long coat hid her hair, which she wore under a scarf, and her eyes were as dark as night. She politely requested, give me 10 minutes, and I'll be gone. I moved to the side. Stepping cautiously into the living room, she stared at the walls as if they were trying to frame her. She informed me that, ever since she spilled the beans at my workplace, she had been fantasizing about me. She came to beg for a second opportunity because she still loved me, she said. I took note. When it came to that section, I was completely exhausted. A soft I'm sorry escaped my lips. However, that chapter of my life has come to an end. Her voice quivered with resignation. It ended the way you wanted it to, and you're here because of that, I told you. I am capable, though. Peace was mine. She ceased, and then departed. With her back to the door, it shut silently. The sound was completely unlike a conclusion. It seemed like tranquility. I purchased a thin, straightforward gold band months later from a modest jewelry store sandwiched between a record store and a diner. The aroma of roasted garlic and vinyl greeted me when I returned home that evening. On the couch, Ava sat cross-legged. I cradled a little black box in my hands and proclaimed, "Ava Harlow, you took me in when I had nothing. You stood by me while I put myself back together. I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you." "Yes, you idiot, yes." She threw me onto the couch in an exuberant scream as she proclaimed her joy, and we were married in an intimate garden. Just our closest friends and family, no staged smiles or grand arch. I did not read from a script when I spoke. I told you that you loved me even when I hated myself. The world turned its back on you. But you remained motionless. How yesterday went is irrelevant. Just one more day with you is all I desire. Her lips met mine. The yard vanished. This is the win, not the court ruling, not the money. This is finding something unshakable in the ashes. I thought to myself that night as I stood hand in hand with Ava and looked around at the friends, laughter, and peace. Something weighs heavily on my heart, and I want to ask you about it before you leave. Was it the correct thing to do for Charlotte to confess about Ryan after everything had already been destroyed, or was it too late for it to make a difference? Please share your thoughts with me below. Please subscribe and like the video if you found this story inspiring or thought-provoking. This is just the beginning of the stories that have yet to be told. Loser. My sister said it like nothing 4 months later. Her charity auction froze. When the bank and court officer walked in, less than 18 hours after returning from Afghanistan, I experienced the most humiliating event of my life. My name is Emily Carter. Over the years, I had frequently dreamed of my return. In other versions, my dad was still alive and waiting with that clumsy half-smile he wore whenever he felt uncomfortable about something. In others, I came quietly, gave him a quick hug, and then we continued as if nothing significant had occurred. Dad wasn't a sentimental person. I wasn't either. As it happened, reality was colder. Somewhere in suburban Pennsylvania, I was alone under a flickering streetlight as the Greyhound bus hissed and pulled away. With a ferocity that obscured everything beyond a few yards, the rain battered the pavement. My shoulder was buried by my duffel bag. My old military backpack strap was pressed against my collarbone, frayed, faded, and obstinately dependable. 9 years. Deployments, sand, dust, heat, and noise, for 9 years. 9 years of learning how to work in environments where discipline was the only constant. And now I was back, standing in the kind of storm that people typically drank wine while watching through windows. I looked at my phone. No fresh messages. Lauren didn't say that. Not from anybody. There were no drivers available, according to the ride-sharing app. Naturally, I set off on foot. It wasn't far to the mansion. I remembered the road. Despite the neighborhood's increased wealth, brightness, and polish, as well as its new gates, landscaping, and cars, it still had obedient animals sleeping under its tidy carports. My jacket was completely soaked by the time I arrived at the curved driveway. Warm, golden rectangles of light poured from the house's windows. Glassware, low, expensive, carefully curated laughter, and voices raised just enough to convey status without coming across as crude were all heard over the rain. A gathering. For 2 more seconds than I should have, I stood there. After that, I went to the door and pressed the bell. Steps. The door opened. Lauren gazed at me, her face cracked for half a heartbeat. Astonishment, acknowledgement, a nearly human quality. The mask then slid into position. God, oh God. Not comfort, not warmth, just frustration cloaked in incredulity. The living room behind her was as bright as a magazine spread. Guests wearing tailored silhouettes, soft lighting, high-end furnishings, and effortless wealth. A champagne flute was held by someone. Leaning against the marble counter, someone else was laughing too loudly at something inconspicuous. The taste of the rain was swallowed. Hello, Lore. Slowly, she examined me from head to toe, wet jacket, duffel, backpack, and travel-worn boots. A specter from another life. You didn't inform me that you would be here tonight. I was unaware that I required an appointment. She clenched her jaw. You look like someone who just got off a bus, she said in a hazy gesture. Yes, I did. Near the fireplace, a couple turned to face us. As a reflex, Lauren moved slightly out of their line of sight. This is a very bad moment. I just returned. I need a place to stay because I just got from Dulles. Quiet. The glass rattled as thunder cracked overhead. After letting out a sharp breath through her nose, Lauren went outside and pulled the door halfway shut. The porch was battered by rain. Your timing is amazing. I was unaware that you were hosting. Emily, it's not hosting, networking is what it is. Correct. She crossed her arms. You had the option of staying at a hotel. I have no hotel funds. She blinked. Are you serious? I was just let go. The paperwork hasn't even reached me yet. Her mouth twisted. A smile, but not quite. You're broke after serving your country for 9 years. It's true, but I wouldn't put it that way. One more thunderclap. All I need for a few nights is a couch. Lauren gave a quiet, unimpressed laugh, sharp. On one of the most significant evenings of the year, you suddenly appear on my porch, dripping rainwater. Lore. You also request a couch. I'm not a shelter manager. I'm your sister. There was no drama in the words. Surgical, clean, and flat. I gazed at her. She lowered her voice and leaned in. You don't have the right to simply re-enter my life whenever it suits you. For convenience, I didn't leave. You went out. For a period. I signed up. The same distinction. The lake behind the house was a sheet of silver violence as lightning flashed across it. When Dad died, I returned home. You arrived late. I was sent out. You're deployed all the time. That was more painful than it needed to be. I was attempting to avoid being killed, so I did not attend the funeral. And I was doing all the planning by myself. She stood up straight. How difficult has it been to support this family while you were away playing soldier? I wasn't having fun. Anything that aids in your nightly sleep. A faint swell of music filled the room. Lauren's name was called. Her annoyance flickered as she looked back. I am unable to do this at this time. All I need is somewhere to sleep. Her eyes became stony. I look at you, and you want to know what I see? I didn't respond. A warning story, Lauren, a woman who squandered 10 years, pursuing meaningless medals. Medals were not what I chased. You searched a desert for meaning. One more lightning strike. Rain poured from the roof. And now you're standing here, without anything, she said softly. My hold on the duffel tightened. She glanced at it and then at me before uttering those words. Loser. It sounded almost kind, almost bored. However, it cut more deeply than any yelled insult. She snatched my duffel from my shoulder before I could respond. Lore. She threw it from the veranda. With a dull, unsightly thud, it struck the sopping lawn. Internal gasps. The door opened more widely. The spectacle, the wet soldier sister, and the graceful younger sister were now visible to all. In front of my guests, I'm not doing this. Lauren lost her temper. Nothing is being done by me. You're making me look foolish. I just requested assistance, and I simply replied. She grabbed a document from a folder on the entry table and pushed it in my direction. You obviously haven't checked your mail, so here it is. The ink was blurred by rain. I used my sleeve to wipe the page. Robert Carter's last will and testament. My dad. I felt sick to my stomach. According to Lauren, this is the official synopsis. Filed, run, finished. I took a look. Property 1. Lauren Carter's lakefront home. Emily Carter owns the Carter Fuel and Service Station. It's not. It is precisely that. He refused. Yes, he did. I must speak with the lawyer. Tomorrow, you can give him a call. When Dad made decisions, I should have been present. Her head was cocked. It's funny how that operates. I raised my head. She went back inside, Lore. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, she said. You can't stay here, I'm sorry. She shut the door after that. I locked it. Staring at my own reflection in the gleaming wood, I stood there in the storm. They started talking again behind the glass. Quieter now, inquisitive, disengaged. Because soldiers pick things up early, I grabbed my backpack and headed down the driveway without turning around. Sometimes all it takes to maintain dignity is the will to keep going. Shortly after midnight, I arrived at Carter Fuel and Service. The lights were long dead and the sign was rusted. Rain trickled through the awning's crack. The smell of old oil, cold metal, and desolation filled the air inside. My father's parting message, my inheritance. I put my bag down and listened to the storm while standing in the dark, unaware that everything was about to change beneath my feet. The storm persisted. It took hold. Like something alive, the wind pressed against the ancient building, rattling loose metal and whistling through seams that had not been repaired in years. From the inside, Carter Fuel and Service appeared worse than it did from the outside. The ceiling was streaked with water stains. Spiderweb patterns were visible in the cracked tile behind the counter. Every flat surface had a layer of dust that was thick enough to document the history of neglect. By habit, I locked the door. Just training, not fear. My flashlight beam moved over shelves filled with antiques, motor oil bottles that had gone bad, yellowed maps, and a faded rack of wipers that no modern car would use. Like a mouth in the middle of a sentence, the register sat open and empty. My backpack fell to the side of the counter. For a second, I was suddenly exhausted, the sort that comes after the adrenaline wears off. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. I learned how to sleep anywhere in Afghanistan. I hadn't learned how to return home from it. The rear office was hardly standing. A filing cabinet, a metal desk, and a chair with one wheel missing. Long ago, discolored tape was used to seal a crack that ran diagonally through the window pane. I wrung water from the sleeves of my soaked jacket and shrugged it off. The air back here was still, but there was no heat or power. I took inventory after opening my backpack. Everything I owned, including clothing, documents and a few personal belongings I had transported across continents, now fit into 2 bags because discarding them would have been equivalent to erasing evidence of my existence prior to the military. After finding a dry sweatshirt, I hastily changed. I moved in an automatic, effective, and nearly detached manner, because I wasn't sure what would come to mind if I let myself think about Lauren, my father, or the word loser. I was surprised by how big the storage room was. Dust-covered drums with handwriting from decades ago that no one still lived on, a concrete floor, rusted shelves, and stacked crates. It smelled of old chemicals, rubber, heavy oil, and stale air that had been sealed for too long. I moved a crate, then another, searching for something of value. Anything soft enough to lie on, such as tarps or blankets. It was then that I saw the floor. Near the far wall, a rectangular area didn't look right. Different, but not immediately apparent. Cleaner around the edges. Long ago, the dust had been stirred and then settled once more. I squatted down and rubbed the seam with my fingers. Not concrete, but wood, a hatch. My heartbeat quickened. There was nothing about this place that suggested dramatic revelations or hidden compartments, so I sat back on my heels and stared at it. It was not a spy film. It was a defunct gas station in rural Pennsylvania that had been abandoned by both memory and progress. Nevertheless, my father had been a quiet, perceptive, and careful man. He fixed things that no one else even realized were damaged. I pulled the oil drums aside slowly. They were empty and lighter than they appeared. A recessed handle on the hatch was almost imperceptible in dirt. After cleaning it with my sleeve, I paused before pulling. Not loudly, but loud enough to reverberate in the void of darkness. The hinges moaned. From below came a rush of drier, cooler air. The beam from my flashlight pierced the aperture. The stairs are narrow and descend. For half a second, my breath stalled. Retraining. Examine. Pay attention. Take a whiff. Not an immediate danger. There is no gas leak. Not a move. I went down slowly. It wasn't a basement at all. It was an intentional vault. Drice closed. Kept intact. The walls were lined with metal shelves that were so precisely arranged that my throat constricted at once. Boxes with year labels. Benders. Cases for equipment. Long dead but silent in the corner, a tiny dehumidifier unit was proof that someone had once taken great care to keep this area in good condition. My dad. There was no question. And my dad. I closed the hatch above me, stepped all the way inside, and felt something almost like shock for the first time since I got back. Decades worth of paper, tax returns, real estate records, maintenance logs, receipts, and insurance files were stored on the shelves. But for everything, not just Carter Fuel and Service. The lakeside house, cars, testimonies, and more. Schematics for communication, engineering diagrams, and technical manuals. One binder was opened by me. I looked back at my father's handwriting. Neat, in control, and emotionless. Telecom systems and project notes. One more binder. Contract labor. Infrastructure. For federal communications. I blinked. My father's career had never been a topic of conversation. Technical work, consulting, nothing of interest. He said that all the time. However, these were not part-time freelance jobs. These were long-term agreements from the late Cold War era that were connected to improvements in government communications. Not cloak and dagger fantasy, not espionage. Something more American, more plausible, a cleared civilian contractor. A man whose systems, not secrets, are trusted. A fireproof lockbox, distinct from the others, was positioned at the middle shelf. Intentional. All over the top was my name. Emily. Painfully, my chest tightened. My fingers were trembling as I opened it. There was a folder with trust instructions, a set of certified copies of legal documents, a leather-bound journal, and a sealed envelope inside. I gazed intently at the envelope. The handwriting of my father once more. I took it open. If you're reading this, Emily, you did just what I thought you would. You returned to the location where everyone else would leave. I took a deep breath. I owe you honesty, which I did not provide when I was living. Timing is important, not because I didn't trust you. My vision became hazy. Not with tears. From exhaustion crashing into emotion I wasn't expecting. There was never any punishment at the gas station. I thought only one of my daughters could pass this test of character. For a moment, I stopped breathing. Value is rarely the first thing that comes to mind. Slowly, I opened the folder and lowered the letter. The trust documents were real. They weren't extravagant or unrealistically wealthy, but they were significant enough to make a difference. Conditional, meticulously planned funds intended for community or veteran-related projects, the restoration or sale of Carter Fuel and Service, personal stabilization during transition, and the legal protection of estate assets. There was no money hidden by my father. He had unspoken power. Another file, handwritten tab, personal notes, and Lauren were located beneath the documents. My heart pounded. I took it open. Observations, dates, incidents, references to pressure, loneliness, behavioral changes during my father's last illness, and no accusations or resentment. One last entry. Lauren may not be aware of the distinction between taking and winning. Now that my mind was racing, I slowly closed the file. Pieces coming together, not retaliation. Clarity, but not yet. The storm was still raging upstairs. For the first time since my return, however, I realized something crucial down here. I wasn't left in ruins by my father. He had given me a job. Lauren was also standing on much less stable ground than she thought, whether she realized it or not. Neither the following week nor the following morning did I confront Lauren. The retaliation that results from humiliation is noisy, impetuous, and messy. In my life, I had witnessed enough of that in barracks, on battlefields, and in broken families. People are reckless when they are emotional. Carelessness leaves traces. I wasn't brought up to be careless by my father. Sometime before dawn, the storm passed. In the morning, Pennsylvania appeared surprisingly tranquil. Pale winter light shimmered on wet asphalt. The air was clear, sharp, and unaffected by the previous night's events. Other than me, nothing had changed inside Carter Fuel and Service. Trust documents were arranged neatly in front of me as I sat at the office's metal desk. Refill 1, $49, in bright red letters, steamed in a paper cup filled with coffee from a nearby diner. Michael Donovan, a probate lawyer, was seated across from me. A conservative suit, a voice trained to remain neutral even when absorbing information that could blow up a family, and a person in their late 40s. I took certified copies out of the vault, and he looked through them. His forehead furrowed a little, then more. I saw that the estate packet did not contain these. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and took off his glasses. In what location did you claim to have found these? Under the service station, in a sealed storage space. A pause. Was there anybody else with access? Not lately. He looked at me for a long moment. You know what this means? Indeed. And you held off on bringing this up. First, I wanted to comprehend it. His face flashed with something like grudging respect. Donovan put me in touch with Victoria Hayes, a forensic accountant. 3 days later, precise, effective, the kind of professional who avoided emotional speculation in favor of speaking in clear numbers. She asked for all financial information pertaining to the lakeside property. Unpaid bills, credit lines, and business accounts associated with Lauren. I wasn't prepared for the picture that came back, but it was one that my father had. Lauren wasn't rich. She floated. Mortgage with a valuation close to maximum. 2 refinances. Credit lines were aggressively extended. Inconsistent business revenue, high visibility and low liquidity. Maintaining a luxurious lifestyle requires leverage rather than ownership. Victoria tapped the area that was highlighted. She is only financially stable if nothing threatens her reputation or sources of income. And she quickly collapses if something does. Just math, no drama. That week, I made one drive by the mansion. New landscaping. In the driveway is a brand new, foreign SUV, delivery vans and caterers. There was no indication of financial fragility from the outside. The trick was that, in America, the most costly addiction is appearance. I went back to work at Carter Fuel and Service. Not literally, but symbolically. Inventory disposal, cracked shelving, and broken door hinges. To partially restore power, I engaged a local electrician. Paid with cash from trust funds, appropriately recorded, and distributed. The small town was quickly filled with word. It was the Carter girl again. It's being fixed by the soldier who lives at the gas station. The majority of people didn't inquire. The etiquette of Pennsylvanian towns is characterized by curiosity without intrusion. Lauren lacked that self-control. One afternoon, she showed up without warning, perfect hair, designer sunglasses, and the subtle aroma of pricey perfume that cuts sharply through the metal and fuel smells. After exiting her SUV, she glanced at the building before turning to face me. Grease-stained jeans and a wrench in hand, they stood there. She had a slow, deadly smile. This is tragic, indeed. I didn't respond. Her heels clicked on the concrete as she approached. I thought you would be gone by now. I'm occupied. With what? Reconstructing the 21st century. Silently, I tightened a bolt. Like a bored predator, she circled me. Are you really doing this? Indeed. I'm currently residing here. She chuckled quietly. God, oh God. Emily. I slowly stood up and looked her in the eyes. Her head was cocked. Do you really believe your father wanted you to have this? I believe Dad was very intentional. Her mouth twitched. Then she grinned once more. She waved her hand around us and said, whatever helps you cope, this place is a fossil. Maybe you could have asked me for money. I did ask you for something. Immediately, her face hardened. Don't. You called me a loser. If the shoe fits. Stillness. The loose edge of the sign above us shook in the wind. Lauren remarked, you know what your problem is. I waited. You confuse stability with visibility and endurance with success. Her grin briefly disappeared before reappearing with a sharper, still resentful expression. Excellent. At least it's human. She went to her vehicle. And Emily, too. I raised my head. She took off her sunglasses, saying, "If you ever decide you can't handle this little survival experiment, don't expect pity." She took off in her car. I filed the legal motions the following Thursday, convinced that she had won. Donovan took care of the submissions quietly. Probate dispute, judicial review request for withheld estate documents, and communication and financial record preservation. At the same time, we obtained ownership of a secondary lien note attached to the lakeside property through a structure authorized by the trust. Just enough debt, not the whole amount. Enough to legally exert pressure. Exactly. The foreclosure process took time. Myth fiction also adores that. Reality is a process. Notifications, due dates, and windows for compliance. However, pressure has a psychological impact long before any repercussions show up. Within a month, Lauren started phoning Donovan, Hayes' office, banks, and anybody else who could help her understand why some of the options she had previously depended on were no longer flexible. She returned to Carter Fuel and Service with a new edge to her voice, tired eyes, and a less polished appearance. "What did you do?" "I was refinishing the counter when I looked up. It's good to see you as well. This isn't amusing. I'm not giggling. My bank gave me a call. They probably did." She gazed at me. "This is your fault. I have paperwork to catch up on. Half of what you're tampering with is beyond your comprehension." "I know enough." She began to breathe more rapidly. "Jealousy has always been a part of you." "Of what?" "My life." I stared at her. "Lauren, your life is paid for." She winced. Then anger flared. "You discovered some dusty files, so you think you're smarter now? Dad, I believe, kept excellent records. You're attempting to ruin me. I am rectifying a story." Her voice was shaking now as she leaned closer. "This is not yours to do. This wasn't started by me. You can't take losing, so you're punishing me." I spoke in a composed manner. "I didn't lose." For the first time, she looked at me with uncertainty. The delusion had already broken by the time the court date was scheduled. Thick cream card stock was used to deliver the invitation. Minimalist elegance, embossed lettering, and the type of design that effortlessly conveys taste. The Carter home hosts the annual winter charity auction for the Donovan Lakeside Foundation. Underneath it was the name of Lauren Carter, a digital brand strategist and entrepreneur. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. I held the card for a long time. One thing Lauren had always intuitively understood: being visible means surviving. She was still performing well, especially at this moment, despite financial strain, legal scrutiny, and tightening deadlines. The mansion was glowing like a staged dream by the night of the auction. The valet attendants walked with practiced civility. The curved drive was lined with luxury sedans. Every time the door opened, the heated air leaking from the entrance was accompanied by the gentle melody of jazz. I got out of the vehicle. Black suit with a tailor's cut. Easy, accurate, and devoid of showmanship, but I sensed the change right away. Eyes lingered. Not acknowledgement. Evaluation, considering that presence is a language. Furthermore, mine was no longer interpreted as a storm-tossed sister. With its carefully chosen generosity, crystal glassware, low golden lighting, tables showcasing auction items, weekend getaways, artwork, and private dining experiences, the interior glistened. Lauren, radiant, in control, and wearing her confidence like armor, was at the center of it all. She was standing close to the opulent staircase, giggling lightly with a group of local celebrities and donors. Every smile was calibrated, every gesture refined. I briefly caught a glimpse of the person who used to braid my hair before school. Then she saw me. Her face momentarily froze before readjusting. A tight, slow smile. With her heels silent against marble, she left the group and approached me. "All right," she said quietly. "This is not what was expected." "Lauren, good evening." She looked at my calm, my posture, my suit. Something flickered behind her eyes. "You clean up nicely." "I try." "What are you here for?" "Observe. I'm here because I was invited." She clenched her jaw. "I didn't invite you. The foundation did." A beat. She leaned closer. "You really chose tonight." "I didn't choose the timing. You always do." I stared at her. She searched my face, looking for anger, bitterness, something messy, finding none. That unsettled her more than hostility ever had. The program began shortly after. A local board member took the stage, voice warm with practiced sincerity. Gratitude, community, philanthropy, then Lauren's introduction. Applause rippled through the room. She ascended the small platform gracefully, poised, unshaken. "Success," Lauren began, "is never a solo journey." I watched from the back, still silent, waiting. Because revenge, if done properly, is not interruption, it is inevitability. Michael Donovan stepped forward before she finished. Not abruptly, not rudely, but with the quiet authority of legal procedure. A subtle murmur moved through the audience. Lauren turned, irritation flashing. Michael, his voice was even. I'm afraid we need to pause the program briefly. A hush spread, confusion, tension. Lauren forced a smile. Is this really necessary right now? Yes. Her eyes hardened. This is a charity event, and this is a legal matter concerning estate assets and financial instruments tied directly to this property. The room shifted. Interest sharpened instantly. Two individuals entered behind Donovan, a bank representative and a court officer. No drama, no shouting, just documentation. Donovan addressed the audience calmly. There are pending probate proceedings involving withheld estate records and financial disclosures. Lauren's face drained slowly of color. This is insane, she whispered. He continued. Additionally, foreclosure actions have been activated due to unresolved lien obligations and material misrepresentations under review. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Lauren stepped down from the platform, voice rising. You cannot do this here. I'm not doing anything, Lauren, I'm enforcing procedure. She looked at me finally, fully, realization striking like physical force. I didn't move. The bank representative spoke next. Professional, detached. Effective immediately, transfer or liquidation of assets is restricted pending court determination. Gasps, whispers, phone subtly raised. Because scandal travels faster than empathy. Lauren's composure shattered. This is harassment. No, Donovan replied quietly. This is consequence. She spun toward the guests. There's been a mistake. But people were already stepping back. Distance forming instinctively. Social oxygen evaporating. Donors murmuring to one another. Board members stiff with discomfort. She turned to me, eyes wild now. You did this to me. I didn't do this. You're destroying my life. I'm exposing a structure that was already collapsing. Tears pooled but didn't fall. You hate me. I hate what you did. Her voice cracked. I did nothing wrong. I held her gaze. You locked your sister out in a storm the night she came home from war. Silence, heavy, absolute. You manipulated a dying man's final days. Her breath hitched violently. I took care of him. You isolated him. I protected him. You controlled access. I was there. Yes. I said quietly. You were. The guests began leaving quickly now. Polite exits dissolving into urgent retreats, because reputation is contagious, and nobody wealthy risks infection. Lauren's knees buckled. Not theatrical, not staged, just gravity claiming someone whose reality had shifted too violently to stand. She clutched the edge of a table, voice breaking. Emily, please. I stepped closer, looked down at her, not triumphant, not cruel, but unflinching. Power, I said calmly, was never in this house. She sobbed openly now. It was in who you were without it. And for the first time in my life, Lauren had no audience left to impress. People assume revenge ends at the moment of collapse. It doesn't. Collapse is loud, public, spectacular. What comes after is quieter and far more revealing. 4 months after the charity auction, winter had settled over Pennsylvania with a steady, colorless patience. Snow edged the roadside in uneven banks. Bare trees stood like witnesses, stripped of opinion. Carter Fuel and Service no longer looked abandoned. Not impressive, not glamorous, but alive. The neon sign had been repaired, not replaced, just restored. The pumps worked. The windows were clean. Inside, the shelves held practical things again. Coffee, snacks, windshield fluid, motor oil that hadn't expired a decade earlier. The place smelled different now. Less rust, more purpose. Lauren arrived just after opening. No SUV, no designer coat, just a borrowed sedan and a hesitation I could see even before she stepped out. She stood beside the car for a long time, studying the building as if approaching a version of reality she still hadn't fully accepted. I was behind the counter, balancing the morning receipts. She entered slowly. The bell above the door chimed, a small sound, but it changed the air instantly. She looked thinner, not fragile, but reduced, like someone who had been living on adrenaline and applause, now forced into the unfamiliar territory of silence. Hi, she said. Her voice was careful, uncertain. I nodded once. Lauren. She swallowed, eyes moving around the store. You really fixed it. I repaired what worked. A pause. It looks good. It functions. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, not warm, just honest. I didn't know where else to go, she said quietly. I continued writing. I assumed they all disappeared. People attached to image usually do. Her jaw tightened faintly, then relaxed. I lost everything. I met her eyes. You lost leverage, not existence. Tears threatened again, but she fought them down. I don't have anywhere to live. You have options. No, she whispered. I don't. That wasn't entirely true. But humiliation reshapes perception. And for the first time, Lauren was seeing life without filters, edits, lighting adjustments. The settlement terms still stand, I said calmly. She nodded faintly. Work placement, debt restructuring, supervised income recovery. Conditions my attorney had insisted be written clearly, legally, without emotional ambiguity. Not mercy, structure. You're serious about making me work here? Yes. I don't know anything about this. You'll learn. I built a brand. Emily. You built visibility. I built a business. You built dependency on perception. Her shoulders slumped. I can't believe you're doing this. I can. She stared at the floor, voice barely audible. I'm sorry. The words were raw, unpolished, late, but real. For the storm, for everything. I stared at her. An apology doesn't erase consequences. I know. It doesn't restore trust. I know. It doesn't change what you did to Dad. She flinched. I know. Another silence. Different this time. Less tension, more gravity. But it can begin something else, I said. Her eyes lifted slowly. Hope, fear, confusion, accountability. I finished. Lauren started that day. No ceremonial speeches, no dramatic reconciliation, just a shift schedule taped behind the counter. Morning inventory, cleaning, register training, customer service. The first week was brutal for her. Not because the work was impossible, but because it was ordinary, uncelebrated, unseen. Standing 9 hours, smiling at strangers who didn't know or care who she used to be online, learning the difference between followers and customers, between engagement and trust. She complained less than I expected. Collapsed once in the back room, exhausted. Cried quietly where she thought I couldn't hear. I did hear. I didn't comment, because some lessons only take root in silence. By spring, Carter Fuel and Service had become something unexpected. A small but steady stop along the county road. Truckers, locals, travelers, veterans. They lingered sometimes, talked, not about tragedy, about life, work, bills, children, regret, second chances. I established the Carter Transition Fund using a portion of the trust assets my father had structured so carefully. Housing assistance for returning veterans, job retraining support, legal guidance, referrals, nothing grandiose, just practical stability. Lauren helped with the paperwork occasionally. Quiet, focused, different. Less performance, more presence. One evening, we sat outside the station after closing. The sky stretched clear and deep above us, stars scattered across it with an indifference I found strangely comforting. Lauren broke the silence first. I used to think winning meant being envied. I didn't answer. She continued. I didn't realize how empty that was. Wind moved softly through the grass. I didn't destroy you, I said finally. She shook her head. No. A pause. I did. We sat there in the quiet. Not fully healed, not magically restored, but no longer enemies. My father had left me a gas station. Yes, but more than that, he had left me a choice. Become bitter, or become deliberate. Revenge, I learned, is most powerful when it does not consume the one who carries it. Justice is colder, cleaner, and strangely more merciful. If this story moved you, unsettled you, or reminded you of something unresolved in your own life, take a moment, reflect, share. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, truth, and the quiet forms of strength we rarely talk about, subscribe. Because sometimes the most important battles happen after the storm ends. At dinner, my son squeezed my hand 3 times, a hidden signal that led me to uncover his girlfriend's fraudulent investment scheme before it was too late. I felt 3 quick, meticulous pulses when my son squeezed my hand beneath the table. It was the same signal we used when he was 7 years old and wanted to leave a restaurant without making a scene. He was now 29 years old, and we were seated at my dining room table as Sophia Carter, his 6-month girlfriend, told me about the Kelowna investment property she was assisting her customers in purchasing. I poured more wine and grinned at her across the table. On the inside, however, all of my nerves were alert. Samuel Harris is my name. I am 58 years old, and I worked on financial crimes for the New York State Police for 18 years before taking an early retirement and consulting for the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of New York for 8 more years. I looked over incidents of fraud. I was an investigator's trainer. Some of the most charming, scary, and compelling people I had ever met were seated opposite tables from me. And at the moment, I was examining one of them. I simply was unaware of its severity at the time. Elaine, my wife, was working on the pie in the kitchen. She asked Sophia about her drive up from Toronto as she entered, laughing and putting down the plate. Benjamin, my kid, leaned out to hold Sophia's hand after laughing at something she said. On the surface, he appeared content. He had a good poker face all the time. He got it from me, that youngster. However, he had also given my hand 3 squeezes. After a Christmas dinner while he was in 2nd grade, his uncle, my brother William, who could talk about municipal water systems for 6 hours straight, had trapped Benjamin in the hallway for 45 minutes. It was after this that we came up with the signal. It became our thing, and after that night, 3 squeezes indicated, I need your help getting out of this, but I don't want to make it obvious. It was more than 10 years since we had utilized it. Tonight, immediately following Sophia's completion of her work explanation, he used it. She had identified herself as a private wealth facilitator rather than an investment broker or financial advisor. She spoke in the manner of someone who has practiced a title. According to her, she assisted a select group of wealthy customers in transferring funds into alternative asset classes that were not offered by conventional banks. Yes, real estate, but also partnerships for energy infrastructure in Alberta, agricultural land trusts in the Okanagan, and private lending pools. She continued, there's a whole world of returns that regular people never even know exists, in a kind manner, not haughtily, but rather as if she were sharing something kind with you. I gave a nod. I questioned her about the oversight of these structures. She stated it was one of the benefits and that her grin was excellent, it was kind and gentle. The real returns came from speedier capital movement, which was made possible by less regulatory friction. Less regulatory friction, I said again in a kind way. Exactly, she replied. Elaine's eyes were on me. She could see something going on behind my eyes that I was trying very hard to hide from her, and she knows my face the way you can only know someone's face after 36 years of marriage. Before the light went out entirely, she got up softly and asked Sophia if she wanted to view the back garden. Benjamin bided his time till the rear door shut. Then, leaning forward and resting both elbows on the table, he gave me the same look he used to give me when he was a teenager and had a difficult thing to say. I know what you're thinking, he said. I said, tell me what I'm thinking. You're thinking something's off. I'm thinking I'd like to hear from you, I said. He rubbed the back of his neck and asked, how long has this been going on? He had been sleeping less. He had been quieter than normal over dinner, laughing a beat after the rest of us, and I could see it in the shadows under his eyes. She moved in with me 8 weeks ago, he stated. She said her lease ended and she needed 3 months to sort out a new place, and I didn't think anything of it. I wanted her to. Okay. But then she started talking to me about my RSP. He was staring at the table. She said I was leaving money on the table. That she could show me how to restructure it into something that would grow 3 times as fast, and it would all be legal, just not something mainstream advisors would ever recommend because they make their commissions off keeping you in mutual funds. I spoke in a very even tone. How much has she asked you to move? She hasn't asked yet. She's been building up to it. She showed me documents, prospectuses. She called them for something called the Maplewood Private Capital Fund. It looked real. It had logos, a registered address in Vancouver, performance charts going back 6 years. He looked directly at me and asked, Benjamin, how much is in your RRSP? 200,000. I thought about that for a while. I remarked, she doesn't know what I do. There was no question. I told her you were retired, NYSP. She said that was so impressive. He stopped. She said it like she already knew and didn't care. Like it didn't occur to her that it mattered. That told me something. Either she was very confident or very reckless. And in my experience, the two were often the same person at different stages of the same career. Has she shown you contracts? Anything she's asked you to sign? She emailed me something last week, a subscription agreement, she called it. She said there was no rush, but the next intake window for the fund closes at the end of the month. Artificial urgency. It is the oldest lever in the fraud playbook. The closing window, the last seat on the plane, the opportunity that won't come again. Real investment funds don't have intake windows that expire in 3 weeks. I need you to forward me that email, I replied. Benjamin murmured, Dad, and I said nothing. Tonight, before she leaves. I'm not trying to tell you who to be with. I'm asking you to let me look at a document, that's all. Slowly, he nodded. After returning inside, Elaine and Sophia were giggling about a local cat that had seemingly wandered into the garden. For the remainder of the evening, Sophia was cozy and relaxed. Without being asked, she assisted in washing the dishes. Elaine, she recalled, drank her tea without milk. She listened with what seemed to be genuine attention and offered insightful follow-up questions regarding a case I had brought up during dinner, a real estate fraud ring in Barrie that had made headlines. She was competent. She was really, really excellent. Elaine remained silent for a while after they had left, standing at the kitchen sink. I said, you saw it too. I saw you go very still when she said less regulatory friction, said Elaine. Elaine dried her hands on the dish towel and turned around, saying, that's your face when you're deciding how to handle something. I need to make some calls tomorrow. How bad do you think it is? I don't know yet, I replied. Elaine gingerly put down the dish towel and said, but Benjamin has $200,000 in an RRSP and a girlfriend who moved in 8 weeks ago and is steering him toward an unregistered investment vehicle with a deadline at the end of the month. Okay, she replied. About 36 years ago, the question was, what do you need me to do? You don't have to describe a problem in its entirety. The other person understands. If you simply identify the weight of it. That evening, Benjamin sent me a 15-page email. It had a registered address on West Georgia Street in Vancouver, a disclosure section at the rear written in technical legalese that most people would glance over without reading, clean fonts, And a watermarked letterhead from Maplewood Private Capital Group. I didn't glance at it. After Elaine went to bed, I sat with it at the kitchen table for 2 hours. No auditor was noted in the performance table that displayed 6 years' worth of returns. The Maplewood Capital Investor Assurance Program was mentioned in the section on investor protections, however it was covered in a different document that was neither linked nor attached. A preferred allocation was available for commitments exceeding $80,000, with a minimum subscription fee of $20,000. The fund's declared strategy, which could imply practically anything or nothing at all, involved private lending arrangements secured by tangible assets. When I looked up the registered address on West Georgia Street, I discovered that it was a business registration service, the type that forwards your mail and charges $40 a month. It's not a legitimate office or company. I could call 2 people I knew. The first was Linda Myers, a lady who had worked as a white-collar investigator for the Toronto RCMP before joining the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC. Over the years, we had worked together on 3 different instances, and she owed me nothing. She answered her phone, nevertheless, and we respected each other's work. The second was a man named Richard Stone, who now operated his own practice after working for 20 years as a forensic accountant for the Hamilton Crown Attorney's Office. Within 20 minutes of looking at a financial document, Richard could tell you if the calculations were designed to be misleading. That evening, I texted each of them to ask if we might talk the next morning. At 8:15, Linda gave me a call. I provided her Sophia Carter's name, the address in West Georgia, and the name of the company, Maplewood Private Capital Group. She remained silent for a while. Her words were, "Give me an hour." At 8:45, Richard called. Over the phone, I read him parts of the membership agreement, and he asked me to repeat things twice. He was silent for a while after I was done, so I assumed the call had ended. "Samuel," he concluded, "the section on asset-backed security, the physical assets they claim to secure the credit facilities against, there's no description of what those assets actually are. Known. A real private credit fund would have a schedule. They'd list the collateral. There's nothing here, so it's empty language. It's a frame without a painting. You could hang anything in it, or nothing. If someone invested and the fund said the assets depreciated or the credit facility defaulted, there'd be no way to verify anything ever existed." Linda responded at 9:50 a.m. According to Linda, she's real. Additionally, I could hear the distinct flatness in her voice that indicated this would not be an easy task. Sophia Carter, 34, was born and raised in Sudbury, attended Laurier for her business studies, and worked for 3 years at a respectable asset management company in Mississauga before being fired. The company complained to FSR. Despite being closed, the file is there. What was the complaint? Inappropriate relationship with a client. The client was a widower, 68 years old. He moved $60,000 into a private fund at her recommendation before the firm caught it. The fund had no registration. The money was gone. The client declined to press criminal charges. Family pressure. Apparently, he was embarrassed. For a moment, I closed my eyes. It was there. A dry run. A scaled-down adaptation of the same drama, practiced, improved, and reapplied. Is Maplewood registered anywhere? No. There is no registered fund by that name in any province. So, she's running a barefaced fraud. It appears that way. The question is whether we can get enough to move on it before she takes the money and closes the window, so to speak. Linda stopped. How close is she to the ask? Subscription agreement already sent. Month-end deadline. How much is at risk? My son's retirement savings $200,000. Another moment of silence. For years, Linda and I had worked cases together. On either side of us were family who had lost everything. It was closer to home this time than either of us had ever experienced. "Okay," she replied. "We need to be careful about how we do this. If she's spooked, she'll disappear. We've seen this before. These operators have exit strategies. Clean personal profiles, minimal physical footprint, the ability to be someone else in a different city in 48 hours. What do you need from me?" "I need Benjamin to agree to one more meeting with her. I need her on recorded audio, making the investment pitch, and asking him to commit funds. In Ontario, you can record a conversation you're a party to without disclosing it. If Benjamin agrees to meet with her and records it himself, his own phone, his own conversation, that recording is admissible. Benjamin's going to have questions about this." "I know, but Samuel, he came to you. He sent you the signal. He already knows something is wrong. He's been waiting for you to tell him how to act on it." She was correct. That afternoon, I took a car to Benjamin's flat. I could tell by the look on his face that he had been nervous all morning when he met me at the door in a t-shirt with his hair still wet. I took a seat on his couch and filled him in on everything. The widower who lost $60,000 and was too embarrassed to file a complaint, Richard's examination of the subscription agreement, the missing auditor, the West Georgia address, and the earlier Mississauga complaint. Benjamin remained still during the entire event. "She told me she loved me," he stated quietly, without anger. When people are absorbing the architecture of something they have fully trusted, they become silent. She said, I know, last week. I remained silent the first time. Nothing could be said to change the situation in that land. He had to endure it. He eventually looked up. I described the recording and asked, what do I need to do? I clarified that he would have to meet with her and give her time to present her case, allow her to request the commitment, let her specify the sum, allow her to explain the timeline and the fund. He had to avoid tipping her off, overreacting, and giving her any indication that anything had changed. I said, can you do that? His steady eyes, which he had possessed from childhood, were fixed on me, those who remained unflinching in the face of difficulty. I tried to convince myself of what I already knew for 8 weeks. He contacted her that night and informed her that he had been considering the subscription agreement carefully and that he had some questions before committing. Yeah, Dad. I can sit across from her for an hour. He told her that instead of merely texting back and forth, he wanted to sit down properly. On Thursday afternoon, she recommended getting coffee. She was kind, relaxed, happy, and everything was perfectly balanced to avoid alarming him. I took the car back to Benjamin's place on Thursday morning. I showed him exactly what to do while we were seated at his kitchen table. Keep his phone in his front shirt pocket, screen facing in, record from the voice memo app, let her talk, don't rush her. If she paused, let the silence sit. People fill silence. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral tone. Don't be confrontational. Don't be overly eager. Be a man who's almost ready to say yes. He nodded throughout the entire thing. I inquired, how are you feeling? To be honest, he gazed out of the window. Angry, but calm angry, the kind where you just want to get it done. That's the right kind, I replied. After driving home, Elaine and I sat in the kitchen and didn't say anything to each other. Stay in that. We waited while listening to the radio as she prepared tea. At 4:17, he texted me. His voice on the phone was steady but thin, as is the case when adrenaline is still leaving the body. Done. I have it all. Calling you in 10 minutes. She had been complete and clear, he told me. She explained the structure of the fund. According to her, the estimated returns are between 18 and 22% each year, which is so far out of the range of any respectable fund that it virtually acts as a signature the intake deadline. The account information, the wire transfer procedure, and the preferred allocation that would be his if he committed more than $80,000. In British Columbia, she had designated an account with a credit union. According to Benjamin, she informed me that the fund managers favored working outside of the major banks due to processing speed. Within 48 hours of the transfer, she promised, my money will be working for me. 48 hours. By the time anyone learned the fund was non-existent and the account had been depleted, I understood what it meant. Money could have been moved through enough layers in 48 hours to make recovery extremely challenging. That evening, I informed Linda over the phone that we had the recording. Benjamin responded to her request in less than an hour by securely sending her the audio file. Overnight, she listened to it. At 7:30 the following morning, she gave me a call. When she said, it's enough, I didn't inquire about the specifics of how it transpired, just that, we're moving today. Neither Benjamin nor I had that responsibility. As far as I know, Sophia Carter was taken into custody at Benjamin's residence on Friday morning just before 8. Benjamin called me throughout the incident, so I know. They're inside, Dad, it's happening. He murmured softly as he stood in his socks in the hallway outside his own front door. Good, I replied. The ensuing inquiry found that Sophia had implemented variations of the identical plan in 2 other regions. Go put on your shoes. Go outside, get some air. She employed 3 different fake vehicles, including the Maplewood Private Capital Fund. The total damages for all 6 of her victims that authorities were able to identify surpassed $750,000. Before Benjamin even met her, several of those individuals had already sent money. The first person who hadn't lost a dime was him. Benjamin returned for Sunday supper 2 weeks later. Elaine and I, him, and us 3 alone. Since Benjamin was in diapers, Elaine has been making her roast chicken. And we were seated at the same table where someone had nearly succeeded in 4 months of meticulous, well-planned deceit. For the most part, Benjamin remained silent at dinner. Not the tense silence of earlier, but a different, calmer one, that follows the completion of a challenging task. As he always did as a child, he assisted Elaine with the dishes without being asked. He then came and sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands around his coffee mug, while she went upstairs to call her sister. I keep asking myself how I didn't see it, I replied. His words were, you did see it, he considered that. That's why you used the signal. I looked at my son and said, I mean earlier. Before it got that far. I had seen him develop from a young boy who needed a secret hand signal to get out of his uncle's monologue about water infrastructure to a man who had sat calmly across from someone who was methodically attempting to ruin his financial future and managed to keep himself together long enough to assist in bringing her down. Benjamin, I replied, she was very good at what she did. She had done it before, she had refined it. She knew exactly which levers to pull: affection, trust, the promise of belonging to something exclusive that other people didn't have access to. That's not a failure of your intelligence. That's her investing significant skill and preparation into deceiving you. It doesn't feel great. It shouldn't. But here's what you should actually hold on to. The moment your gut told you something was wrong, you listened to it. You didn't talk yourself out of it completely. You reached out. That's the thing that made every other thing possible. He gave a hesitant nod. Most people don't, I replied. That's the tragedy in these cases. Most people feel the wrongness and convince themselves they're being paranoid. They're embarrassed to say anything. They don't want to look foolish, or they don't want the relationship to be what it's turning out to be. So, they wait. And while they're waiting, the window closes, and the money moves, and the person is gone. As the rain began to beat against the kitchen window, we sat for a while listening to Elaine's phone conversation upstairs. Benjamin inquired, "Is she going to prison?" "That's for the courts to determine," I replied. "What I can tell you is that the evidence is strong. The recording is clear. And there are 6 other people who now have a chance at some form of accountability because you didn't let her finish what she started." He remained silent for a while. "So am I," I replied, after which, "I'm glad I texted you." He gave me a little, genuine smile and said, "And Benjamin, you came to me. That matters. Don't ever stop doing that." We stayed there until Elaine returned downstairs and the rain increased, at which point the 3 of us proceeded into the living room to watch an old hockey game. It was a typical evening at home, and neither Benjamin nor I gave a damn. Elaine dozed off in the armchair with her feet curled up. And that felt like the correct thing to be after all of that. As someone who has worked in financial crime for more than 30 years, there are some things I want to make apparent. This kind of fraud occurs because it works. It works on trustworthy individuals who are receptive to love, connection, and the possibility of positive things rather than on stupid people. The most experienced financial predators don't seek for unsuspecting victims. They seek for emotionally accessible victims. They have patience. Before they offer any financial advice, they establish a sincere rapport. The victim is already in a relationship that feels real, because it is real in many respects by the time the investment talk begins. The time spent, the love exchanged, the feeling of recognition. The warning signs are frequently only apparent in hindsight or to an outside observer. An excessively high return on investment, anything that regularly exceeds 8 or 9% per year, ought to raise grave concerns. A fund that isn't officially registered with the provincial securities authorities. It turns out that the business address is actually a mail forwarding service, urgency in relation to a due date, unwillingness to let independent financial or legal evaluation of materials. These are hints to slow down and investigate more closely, but they are not assurances of fraud. Investment funds are required to register with provincial securities regulators in Canada. The Canadian Securities Administrators National Database, located at securities-administrators.ca, allows you to confirm any fund and advisor. It costs nothing and takes 3 minutes. Your financial life may depend on those 3 minutes more than any other. Additionally, please pay attention if someone in your life contacts you via any method they are aware of. We came up with a hand signal for a 7-year-old's condition, and Benjamin used it. He utilized it because he wanted someone outside the scenario to look at what was going on, even before his conscious mind was able to express it aloud. No financial document can match the value of that instinct. Have faith in yourself and safeguard it in those you care about. We nearly lost money, but we didn't. A 29-year-old man sitting at a dinner table and grasping his father's hand 3 times ultimately made the difference. It's not nothing if your intuition is telling you anything. It isn't. On my wedding day, Mom tried to steal my Mercedes for my sister, but my groom exposed her in front of 180 guests, and I cut ties with them for good. At my wedding, my mother smiled and said, "We're passing the car his parents gave you over to your sister." My sister laughed and added, "Relax, it's just a car." My fiancé simply looked at her and said nothing, but his quiet told volumes. The rehearsal dinner went wonderfully. Everything is prepared for tomorrow. I should have been flying on air, but something about my mother's look bothered me as I drove back to the hotel that night. She had taken my sister Megan away 4 times throughout supper, speaking furiously and casting looks in my direction. Emma Caldwell is soon to become Emma Whitaker in less than 24 hours. I am 28 years old, and tomorrow was meant to be the best day of my life. My fiancé James comes from old money, the sort that does not flaunt its wealth but quietly controls half of our city's commercial real estate. 4 months ago, his parents gave us a lovely wedding present. A fully outfitted Mercedes GLE 500 SUV bearing my name on the title. It was sitting in their garage since James and I were still living in different apartments until after the wedding. My family is not like yours. We are not impoverished, but we have always gotten by. Mom worked as an office manager, earning around $55,000 per year. Her father died of cancer when I was 18, Megan dropped out of college twice before quitting up completely. She's now 30, 2 years older than me, and still lives at home for free while working part-time at a boutique. Growing up, Megan was always my favorite. She had the larger bedroom, later curfew, and the pricey prom dress, whereas I wore anything from Target. Mom excused it by stating Megan needed more assistance since she lacked confidence. Translation: I was self-sufficient and had high marks, so I didn't need as much care. A brew where the trend persisted until maturity. When I enrolled in law school, my mother hosted a little supper. When Megan finished a 5-week online social media marketing course, her mother organized a celebration with food using her small funds. The wedding morning arrived with beautiful weather. My bridesmaids assisted me into my handmade Vera Wang gown, which James had surprised me with. His family insisted on paying for the wedding, which clearly irritated my mother. She'd sought control over the planning, but James's mother, Margaret, graciously thwarted every attempt, keeping things polished and beautiful rather than the flashy display Mom had imagined. Mom arrived into the bridal suite as I was touching up my lipstick. She was wearing a dress that was way too close to white for mother of the bride protocol, but I had already fought and lost that battle. "Sweetheart, you look beautiful," she remarked, but her smile was forced. "I wanted to talk to you about something before the ceremony." My stomach fell. Nothing good ever come of such words. "Can it wait until after?" I inquired, fastening my veil. "It really can't." "It's about the Mercedes, Aubrey." My hands froze. "What about it?" She reclined on the velvet sofa, straightening her clothes. "Well, Bethy's car finally died last week. The transmission went and it would cost more to fix than the car is worth. She needs reliable transportation for job interviews." "Rook," I said softly. "What does that have to do with my wedding gift?" Mom's chuckle was light-hearted and rehearsed. "Oh honey, you're being dramatic. James's family has plenty of money, they can get you another car anytime. But Megan really needs one now, and that Mercedes is just sitting there unused." It took my breath away. "Mom, that car was a wedding gift to me and James from his parents with my name on the title." "Exactly. Your name, not James's, which means you can do whatever you want with it. And the loving, generous thing would be to help your sister." She rose up and adjusted her hair in the mirror. "We're passing the car over to Megan. I already discussed it with her and she's thrilled. She's even planning to drive it to job interviews next week." "You discussed giving away my car without talking to me first." "What's that?" "Emma, don't be selfish. You're marrying into wealth. You'll have everything you could ever want. Your sister is struggling. This is what family does." She walked toward the front door. "Besides, everything is already determined. Megan will pick it up from the Whitaker estate tomorrow." Margaret was surprisingly understanding when I called her yesterday. My eyesight turned crimson. "You called James's mother and told her you're giving away the car she gave me?" Response: I explained the family situation. She said she'd talk to James about it. Mom checked her watch. "We should get you lined up. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. She departed before I could answer. I stood there in my lovely clothing, suddenly feeling like a costume. My idyllic day is unraveling. Megan strolled in wearing a bridesmaid dress that she had felt was too basic for her tastes. "Hey bride," she smiled, totally ignorant of what had already occurred. "I'm so excited about the Mercedes. Mom said I could have it since you're going to be loaded now anyway." "Hey Brookie Megan, that's not he." "Oh come on Emma. Don't be like this." She rolled her eyes. "It's just a car. A breaker. I actually need it." Something inside of me cracked. However, years of being the responsible one kept my voice even. "Megan, that car was a gift from James's parents to me for our wedding." "Aber." She shrugged and examined her manicure. "Yeah, but like you don't even need it. James probably makes more in a month than I'll see in a year. Why are you being so stingy?" "Aber." O'Brien said. "Stingy. It's my property." "Relax, it's just a car." She stated it nonchalantly, as if borrowing a sweater. "Besides, Mom already arranged everything. I'm picking it up tomorrow at 10 o'clock. A guffaw. Rachel, my companion of honor, had strolled in during this encounter. In a matter of seconds, her countenance changed from perplexed to outraged. "I'm sorry." "What?" Emily asked. "Emma's being dramatic about me getting the Mercedes that James's parents gave her like she won't have 50 more cars in her lifetime." "Ira C." Rachel glanced at me and said, "Please tell me this is a joke." My phone buzzed before I could answer. A text from James. "My mom just told me what happened. Don't worry, stay calm, I'm handling it." Hey Burr. The service began at 4 p.m. in the Whitaker Estates garden. 180 visitors sat on white seats placed in precise rows. James stood at the altar, looking like he'd walked out of a magazine, with his best man and groomsmen encircling him. I walked down the aisle on my uncle's arm because my father was not present, trying to focus on James's face rather than my mother's happy smile in the front row. Abra, we exchanged vows. When James pledged to love and adore me, he spoke steadily and confidently. When it was my time, I had to blink back angry tears that had nothing to do with happiness. The officiant declared us husband and wife. James kissed me, and everyone clapped. The event took place in a huge tent decked with thousands of white flowers and sparkling lamps. Dinner was served, speeches were given, and I went through the motions, my mind racing. James kept clutching my hand beneath the table, but he appeared strangely calm considering what had transpired. After the first dance, we went around meeting folks. Mom cornered me at the dessert table with Megan trailing after her. "Emma darling, you look absolutely radiant," Mom said, caressing my cheek. "I'm so proud of you." "Are we really doing this right now?" I said quietly. "Abrahe doing what?" "I'm congratulating my daughter on her wedding day." She looked around at the lavish decorations, designer gowns, and pricey champagne flowing freely. "You certainly landed well. The Whitakers really know how to throw an event." Megan giggled faintly, drunk from the open bar. "Seriously, Emma, this must have cost like $500,000, and you were worried about one little car." Several surrounding visitors turned to stare. James appeared by my side, his hand touching the small of my back. "Mrs. Caldwell, Megan, are you enjoying the reception?" His voice was sweet, but I'd learned to detect the edge in it. "Oh, it's lovely, James," Mom said. "Your family has been so generous," which is actually what I wanted to mention to Emma earlier about the Mercedes. Brooke. James made a smooth interruption. "Yes, my mother told me about your phone call." Abra. Mom's smile faded significantly. "Oh, well, I hope she explained the situation with Megan's car. It really is urgent that she has reliable transportation." "She did explain," James stated. "She explained that you called asking us to sign over Emma's wedding gift to Megan because it would be the family-oriented thing to do." "Ira," Megan said, clearly buoyed by champagne. "It's not like Emma needs it. You guys are rich, you could buy 10 Mercedes and not even notice." Ebragri. The adjacent talks had completely halted. People were openly gazing. James' parents, his sister Sophia, and her husband had all moved closer together. I could see James's jaw tense, the only bodily indication that he was upset. He and I had spent months arranging this wedding together, making sure every detail was flawless. His parents wrote checks without blinking, never making me feel as if I didn't deserve the fairy tale day. And here was my mother, at the reception they'd paid for, attempting to disperse their presents as if she were Robin Hood. "Actually, Megan, let me ask you something," James continued, keeping his tone casual. "When was the last time you paid for your own phone bill?" "Ira," Megan blinked, taken off guard. "What does that have to do with Ebby? Just answer the question." "Abro, Mom pays it. It's a family plan, right? And your car insurance before your car died." "Ebrook, which is also on Mom's agenda." Megan's confidence was waning. "A bricker rents. I live at home. A Burr credit card bills. A brag." Megan's face reddened. "Mom helps me sometimes when I'm short." "So, let me get this straight," James said, his voice charming yet harsh enough to break glass. "You're 30 years old. You work part-time, approximately 15 hours a week. Based on what you told me at the rehearsal dinner, your mother pays for your housing, phone, insurance, and regularly covers your credit card debt. And you think Emma, who put herself through college working 2 jobs, who graduated law school with honors while waitressing on weekends, who has never asked her mother for a dime since she turned 18, you think she's the selfish one?" The stillness was terrible. I could hear someone's champagne glass clink on their plate from 3 tables away. Mom's face had changed from flushed to pale. "Abra," James answered. "Daniel, you're making this into something it's not," my mother responded. "No, Mrs. Caldwell, I'm making it exactly what it is. Let me tell you what Emma hasn't told you because she's too kind to throw it in your face." James's hand remained on my back, solid and reassuring. When Emma was applying to law schools, she got accepted to Harvard. Full ride. Do you know why she turned it down? A brook. I felt my breath catch. I hadn't told James this explicitly, but he must have pieced it together from previous chats. She declined because you contacted her weeping and said you couldn't manage Megan's depression if Emma relocated to Boston. You mentioned Megan's yearning to be close to her big sister. Emma went to the state school instead, commuting from an apartment she couldn't afford, rather than staying on campus and returning home on weekends to assist Megan. Mom opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And you know what Megan was doing during those weekends Emma was sacrificing her dream school for? James gazed at my sister. Dating that guy Tom, going to parties, living her life. She wasn't depressed. She was fine. But you knew if you played the mental health card, Emma would fold because that's what Emma does. She puts everyone else first. Aber. How dare you? Mom finally spoke up. You have no idea what our family has been through. I know exactly what your family has been through because I've spent 2 years watching you do it, James added, his voice rising significantly. I've watched you guilt Emma into missing our 6-month anniversary dinner because Megan had a bad Tinder date. I've seen you expect Megan to pay Bethany's half of your birthday dinner bill because she's suffering right now. I've seen you beg Megan to postpone our engagement photographs by a week because they were too near to Bethany's birthday and you didn't want her to feel overshadowed. Every example struck like a physical blow. These were private moments, and I had made minor sacrifices to maintain the peace. Hearing them read aloud makes the pattern difficult to miss. James stated weakly. Family makes sacrifices. No, Mrs. Caldwell. Megan makes sacrifices, whereas Bethany makes demands. There's a distinction. James looked around at the audience. I apologize to our guests for this scene, but I think it's important that everyone understand what's happening here. This isn't about a car. This is about a lifetime of my wife being treated like her accomplishments, her feelings, and her property are all community resources to be distributed as her mother sees fit. Margaret Whitaker went forward, her elegant gown gleaming under the tent lights. She had been silent until now, but her demeanor was cold. Mrs. Caldwell, when you called me yesterday, you told me that Megan had always been selfish with material things and that this was an opportunity for her to learn to share with family. You asked me as her new mother to help teach her generosity. Aubrey, the audience gasped. Several individuals glanced at Mom with open disdain. What you didn't know, Margaret continued, is that I had lunch with Megan 2 weeks ago, and she told me about a scholarship fund she's been quietly contributing to at her old high school for the past year. $1,200 per month, every month, for students from low-income families who want to pursue law degrees. She deliberately sought anonymity, since she did not want to be recognized. Aubrey. I felt tears well up in my eyes again. I had forgotten I had mentioned it to Margaret on one of our shopping outings. So, when you phoned to talk about teaching my daughter-in-law generosity, I have to tell you, Mrs. Caldwell, it felt really rich coming from someone who trained one daughter to give and another to receive. Margaret's voice may have stopped hellfire. That Mercedes was meant to be a symbol of welcome to Megan, a way of telling her that she's part of our family now. You attempted to manipulate me into betraying that welcome. That's not something I take lightly. James's father, Robert, had been standing slightly behind his wife. He talked infrequently, but when he did, everyone listened. I built my company from nothing. I understand what it means to work hard and earn what you have. What I don't understand is watching your child succeed and feeling entitled to the fruits of that success. Megan didn't earn that car, Bethany said, tears running down her cheeks now. You people just gave it to her because James married her. She didn't do anything for it. You're absolutely right, Robert answered quietly. She didn't earn it. It was a gift. Do you know why we give gifts, young lady? Because we care about someone and want them to have something nice. Not because we expect that gift to be redistributed to their relatives. If we'd wanted to give you a car, we would have given you a car. Aber. But that's not fair, Bethany remarked. Life isn't fair, Emily said, her patience visibly drained. I'm James's sister, and I got a car when I got married too. You know what my sister-in-law didn't do? Show up at my wedding and demand I give it to her unemployed brother? Because that would be insane. This is insane. The bridesmaids created a protective semicircle around me. My cousin Lily, with whom I hadn't spoken in years, approached my mother and addressed her. I need to say something. When I got engaged last year, you contacted my mother and said it was a pity I was getting married before Bethany because it would make Bethany feel awful about her single status. You advised that I postpone my own wedding for 6 months so that Bethany would not be uncomfortable. Aubrey. Mom's eyes widened. Lily, that was a private conversation. Ebru. Number. It was a ludicrous request that demonstrated exactly how you work, and my mother, your own sister, said no. She warned you that you created a monster in Bethany by never allowing her to feel disappointment or repercussions, and that you were ruining your relationship with Megan by treating her as a support system rather than a daughter. Lily's voice cracked. We've all watched this for years. We've all stayed quiet because we didn't want to cause family drama. But you know what? You caused this. You did this. Eber relatives were nodding. My Aunt Rachel, Mom's other sister, appeared to want to talk, but remained mute. The weight of public opinion was crushing my mother. And someplace deep inside, I felt a twinge of sadness, but largely I felt vindicated. James's expression remained completely cheerful. You're right, Bethany. We could buy 10 Mercedes, but here's the thing. We shouldn't have to. Mom's face reddened. James, I don't think you understand how difficult things have been for Bethany. I understand perfectly, he said, his voice echoing around the quiet tent. I understand you spent 30 years prioritizing Bethany's demands over Megan's needs. I realize that you contacted my mother and attempted to persuade her to give up our property by making her feel guilty about our family's financial success. But I don't see why you believed it would work. Abra. Bethany's face became pale. It's just a car, she said faintly. James gave her his whole attention. Just a car, right? So, if it's just a car, it shouldn't matter that you don't get it. That's not what I meant. No, I know exactly what you meant. His voice was still velvety. You meant that Megan's gifts, Megan's accomplishments, Megan's happiness, all matter less than yours. Because your mother taught you that you're entitled to everything your sister has. Ibrahim's mother stepped forward. Now, you wait just a minute. No, Mrs. Caldwell, you wait. James's father had joined us now and his presence drew quick notice. Let me make something very clear, that Mercedes was a gift to my daughter-in-law, not to her family, not to be redistributed as you see fit to her. With all due respect, Mr. Whitaker, Mom said. Family helps family. With all due respect, Margaret Whitaker interrupted, her tone icy. You don't get to decide how my son and his wife manage their assets. You certainly don't get to volunteer their property for redistribution. Abaruri. The tent was completely quiet now. Even the band had stopped playing. Abby and Bethany's eyes welled up. I can't believe you're all being so mean about this. I just needed help. Aber, you need help. James's sister Emily spoke forward. From what I heard at dinner last night, you work 15 hours a week and spend your paychecks on designer purses. That's not needing help. That's poor planning. Ira, how dare you, Mom said, her voice rising. You people think your money makes you better than everyone. Ibrahu, this isn't about the money, I eventually said, my voice quivering. This is about respect. You did not ask me about the automobile. You demanded it. You phoned my in-laws behind my back, attempting to influence them. You told Megan she could pick it up tomorrow as if it had already been chosen on my wedding day, which you did. Emma, honey, I was trying to help your sister. Abby. No, Mom. You were doing what you've always done, prioritizing Megan and expecting me to fall in line because I'm the responsible one who doesn't need attention. Years of suppressed fury were gushing forth. When I graduated from high school with honors, you skipped the ceremony because Megan had a horrible date. When I got into law school, you encouraged me not to make a big deal about it because Megan was insecure about her own decisions. And now, on my wedding day, you're attempting to take away a present from my husband's family because Megan requires another bailout. Tears were running down my cheeks, spoiling my makeup. But I didn't care any longer. I spent my whole youth being second to Megan, keeping myself smaller so she could feel greater. But I am done, Mom. I'm done apologizing for success. I'm done feeling bad about having beautiful stuff. And I am absolutely done allowing you to disperse my things as if you had any right to it. Megan was also weeping now. Mascara ran down her cheeks. I didn't know you felt that way. Of course you didn't, since you've never had to consider other people's sentiments. Mom made sure of it. Mom gazed around at the assembled audience. Her face was a mask of shame and wrath. "I cannot believe you're doing this in front of all these people. Your own mother." "My mother attempted to steal my wedding gift." I cut her off. "Yeah, I think these people should know exactly who you are." Daniel's fingers curled around my waist. "The car stays in Emma's name. The discussion is over. If you'd like to continue enjoying the reception, you're welcome to. But if you're going to keep pushing this issue, I'll have security escort you out." Ibra, Mom's mouth expanded and closed like a fish. She plainly expected Daniel to be more conciliatory in order to maintain peace. She had made a serious error in her calculations. "You'd kick your own mother-in-law out of the wedding reception?" she said, shocked. "Kibra, I would throw out anyone who is attempting to ruin my wife's wedding day," Daniel stated, his voice firm. "Urf." Mom grasped Megan's arm. "Come on, we don't have to stay here and be insulted." They turned to go, but Daniel's voice interrupted them. "Oh, and Mrs. Caldwell, one more thing." Mom turned back, hoping that he would back down. "If you ever try to manipulate my family or shame my wife into giving you anything else, I will make sure that everyone in your social circle knows precisely what you did today. My family has contacts in every major company and social group in this city. Good luck keeping your membership at the country club once they see how you treat your daughter." It was a premeditated threat, delivered with surgical precision. Mom's face became white as she realized the ramifications. With a few phone calls from the Whitakers, she may lose the social contacts she had worked so hard to develop in order to retain her image of comfortable middle-class respectability. She walked away without saying anything else, pulling Megan along with her. After a brew, the tent remained silent for another minute. Then Daniel's grandma started to clap gently. Others joined in the ovation, which grew until the whole gathering was cheering. Several others approached me and hugged me, telling me about their own family members that pushed their boundaries. I excused myself to the restroom, seeking a moment alone. Jessica followed me. "Are you okay?" she said as I grabbed the sink, attempting to steady my quivering hands. "A brewer. I just publicly humiliated my mother at my own wedding." "No, you just publicly defended yourself at your own wedding. There's a difference." Jessica gave me tissues. "I've known you since freshman year of college. I've watched your mom treat you like you're less important than Megan for a decade. You needed to do this. Why does it feel so terrible then? Because you're a good person who was raised to believe that standing up for yourself is selfish." Jessica applied my makeup with soft hands. "But you're not selfish, Emma. You're finally putting yourself first, and that scares you because it's new." We returned to find Daniel conversing with his parents and several other visitors. When he spotted me, he excused himself and came right over. "My grandmother wants to make a toast," he replied gently. "Are you up for it, T-Brook?" I nodded, despite feeling fatigued. We approached the head table, where his grandmother, Margaret Whitaker, was holding a champagne glass. She was 93 years old, sharp as a tack, and known for expressing her opinion. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice unusually powerful for her age. "I've been to a lot of weddings in my life. Society weddings, quiet ceremonies, shotgun weddings, and everything in between. But this is the first wedding where I've watched a young woman stand up for herself so beautifully." The audience muttered their appreciation. "A brewer. When I married my husband 70 years ago, women were expected to be quiet and accommodating. We were taught that family came first, even when family treated us poorly. I spent 30 years of my marriage catering to my mother-in-law's every whim before I finally learned to say no." She stared at me straight. "Emma, you learned that lesson much younger than I did. You stood here today and drew boundaries that you should have been allowed to draw years ago. I'm proud to call you my granddaughter." The applause was tremendous. I was sobbing again, but this time out of thankfulness, not anger or hurt. Margaret approached and hugged me, smelling of costly perfume and peppermint. "Your mother will either learn from this or not," she murmured into my ear. "Either way, you'll be fine. You got steel in your spine, girl. Use it. A brother." The rest of the reception continued with fresh vigor. People approached me often, and I heard variations on the same tale. Difficult moms, entitled siblings, and family members who saw their achievement as their legacy. One woman told me about her sister, who attempted to move into her home after she married since there was additional space. Another described how her brother expected her to pay his mortgage since she earned more money than him. James's college friend Tom approached him, and I overheard him say, Man, I've never seen you go to war like that. It was like watching a different person. She brr, James said immediately. That's my wife. Nobody treats her like that, not even her own family. Around 10 p.m., when the event was winding down, my Uncle Peter approached me. He was my father's brother and had always been kind but distant. Emma, I need to apologize to you, he continued with red-rimmed eyes. Your dad would have been so proud of what you did today and ashamed of me for not doing it sooner. Uncle Peter, let me say this. After your father died, I should have stepped up more. I should have observed how Claire treated you and Megan differently and said anything. Instead, I kept my lips shut because I didn't want to make trouble. He wiped his eyes. Your dad loved you so much, Emma. He used to worry about what would happen to you after he was gone because he knew your mom favored Megan. I promised him I'd look out for you, and I failed. A brew. The word of my father shattered something in my chest. He has been gone for 8 years, yet I still miss him every day. He'd been the one to promote my dreams, tell me I was clever enough for law school, and believe in me wholeheartedly. Dad knew, I muttered. Of course he knew. He and your mother were constantly fighting about it. He wanted her to treat you both equally, but she constantly found a reason for why Megan required more care. Peter's voice was bitter. After he died, it got worse. I should have intervened. I'm sorry. Brew. You're here now, I murmured, hugging him. That matters. Briananiel is a good dude. Your father would have liked him, especially after tonight. Peter mustered a faint smile. Having a husband who will go to war for you is a terrible wedding gift. As midnight neared, James and I prepared to depart for our hotel before our early trip to Bora Bora. I threw my bouquet, which Sophia caught and promptly passed to her teenage daughter, much to everyone's amazement. James flung the garter, which his closest buddy caught, and quickly attempted to give it to anyone else. We walked through a sparkler tunnel to our waiting car, a classic Rolls-Royce that would transport us to the hotel. As we drove away, I looked back at the illuminated tent and the people who were still partying, and I felt something change in my chest. This was my new beginning. Not only the marriage, but the border I'd set and ultimately guarded. A buru, no regrets? James inquired, hooking his fingers around mine. None. I responded sincerely. Except that I didn't shut them down sooner. I should have said something the first time your mother used that guilt trip bullshit. You did it today. That is what matters. We spent our wedding night at a 5-star downtown hotel, and James carried me across the threshold of the room. We were both laughing, the weight of the evening having lifted, and we ordered room service at 2 a.m., eating chocolate cake in bed and chatting about everything that had transpired. Your cousin Lily was amazing, remarked James. I had no idea your mom had tried to make her postpone her wedding. I didn't either. That, however, is really typical of Mom. I nibbled at the cake. Do you think I went too far, Emma? She tried to steal your car during your wedding. There is no going too far in that circumstance. He laid his dish down and drew me closer. You've spent your entire life making yourself smaller so that others can feel larger. Today, you took up space. That is not going too far. That is finally going far enough. I keep waiting to feel guilty. Aber do you? He searched my emotions honestly. No, I am sad. I'm angry, I am relieved. But I am not guilty. A brick. Good. Because you have nothing to be guilty about. He kissed my forehead and said, get some sleep. We have an aircraft to catch in 6 hours. However, sleep remained elusive. I lay awake thinking about my mother's expression when James threatened her country club membership, Megan's tears, and the ovation of 180 people who had witnessed me finally standing up to years of cruelty. Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed, and I opened it, against my better judgment, to see a text from an unknown number. This is your Aunt Rachel. I've wanted to say this for years. Your mother caused this predicament. She helped Megan and ignored you. I applaud you for setting boundaries. Your father would be too. Congratulations on your nuptials. James, who had awakened as I moved, read the Burkett and grinned. See, you're not the villain in this story. Abram, Mom would disagree. Mom's opinion ceased mattering the minute she tried to manipulate my parents. His voice was stern. She made her choice. She picked Megan over you once too many. She has to deal with the repercussions of her decision. The journey to Bora Bora was long yet comfortable, especially in first class. James had booked us a private overwater house at a resort that looked like something out of a magazine, and we spent 2 weeks snorkeling, reading novels on the deck, making love with the sound of waves beneath us, and not talking about my family at all. On the 4th day, I made the mistake of checking Instagram, where Megan had posted a series of stories. The first was a hazy post about fictional people who forgot where they came from. The second was a snapshot of a used Honda Civic captioned, "When you have to adult on your own because family abandons you." The third was a copy of a family alienation story with multiple sobbing emojis. James pulled the phone from my grasp and gently tossed it onto the couch. "No, we're on our honeymoon. Her drama does not get to join us. A brewer. She's making me look like the bad guy. A burqa for whom? Her 300 Instagram followers. What happened? Sarah, everyone from that wedding has already posted about it. Jessica's video was shared 50 times. The truth is out there. Allow Megan to create whatever story she wants. The ones who matter are aware of what actually occurred. A brew." He was correct, but it still ached. I had spent so much time trying to be the nice daughter, the supporting sister, the family member who never created difficulty. Letting go of that identity was more difficult than I had anticipated. Abra. As the sun began to drop, James brought me onto the deck. "I'm sorry you had to do that," he said softly into my hair. "Abra. I'm not," I told myself, surprised. "I should have done it years ago." "For the record," he said, "my parents have already ordered you a second Mercedes, in a different color with upgraded features. It will be delivered next week. The original is being donated to a women's shelter that assists abuse survivors in getting back on their feet." I moved back to look at him. "You donated my car, Abare. It was never truly yours once she touched it. I wanted you to have something that was absolutely free of her influence." He grinned. "Plus, the new one has heated and cooled seats, and I've already completed all of the title transfer paperwork for the donation. The women's shelter will sell it off to help support their initiatives." I began laughing, still weeping, and undoubtedly looked like a complete mess. "I love you so much, Ekri. I love you too. And for what it's worth, my mother is already drafting a very detailed prenuptial addendum that specifies any gifts from my family cannot be transferred to your relatives without both of our explicit written consent. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Oh, Bree, I thought you'd appreciate the legal specificity." We danced on the balcony as our guests rejoiced at home. Jessica emailed me later and said, "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Your mother's expression when James endangered her club membership. Priceless." I said, "I can't believe I did that in front of 180 people. Abru, everybody here is on your side. Have you seen Mrs. Henderson?" She cheered louder than everybody else. Apparently her daughter experienced something similar with her in-laws. The rest of the celebration was a flurry of congratulations, knowing stares, and numerous elderly ladies telling their own experiences about family boundary concerns. James's parents made a point of toasting our daughter Emma, who deserves everything good in the world. Mom didn't call that night or for the next 2 weeks while we were on our honeymoon. The first week back from the honeymoon was surreal. Moving into our new home, adjusting to married life, and trying to digest all that had transpired during the wedding. Margaret contacted me every other day to check in, never pressing but always there. It was the type of parental support I'd been looking for my whole life. When I eventually switched on my phone, there were 17 voicemails from Mom, which I erased without listening to. Megan texted, "I needed to buy a used Honda. I hope you are pleased." I banned her phone number. On Thursday, Sophia, James's sister, asked me to lunch at a chic cafe downtown, where she was already seated when I arrived. "How are you holding up?" she inquired after we had ordered. "Honestly, I'm not sure. A part of me feels liberated. A part of me feels like I just blew up my entire family." "I did not blow anything up. You just ceased being the foundation that kept everything together while being treated as dirt." Sophia stirred the iced tea. "Can I tell you something? When James initially informed us about you, Mom did a background check." Abra wrote, I nearly choked on the water. "She what?" "What?" "Burke, do not stress out. She does that with every person we date. Seriously, old family habit." Sophia apologized and said, "But what came back was interesting. She learned about the scholarship fund you put up. She discovered you had been paying part of your mother's home expenditures for the last 2 years without notifying anybody. She discovered that you had borrowed Megan's $7,500, which was never repaid. She discovered records of dozens of money payments to your mother and sister dating back years. How did she, Sarah? My family has resources, we don't use them carelessly. But Mom wanted to know who James was marrying. Sophia leaned forwards. When she saw all of this, she told me she was concerned. Worried that you were being overly generous, that your family was taking advantage of you, and that you would bring that dysfunction into our family. James persuaded her to give you a chance, saying you were different. And then my mom tried to steal my wedding gift. When Mom called me after talking to your mom, she said, I was wrong. Emma isn't very generous. She's been abused into charity, and I'll be damned if I let them keep doing it. Sophia stretched out and grasped my hand. Emma, you have a true family now. We're not flawless, but we don't accept more than we can offer. The talk stuck with me for days, and the concept that I'd been abused into giving impacted me in a way I hadn't expected. I'd always thought of myself as a nice person who helped others when they needed it. But, looking back, how much of that aid was voluntarily provided versus guilt extracted? The next Tuesday, I was at work when reception contacted me. Emma, there's someone come to see you. Lydia Caldwell says she is your mother. Brie, my stomach dropped. Tell her I'm not available. A brewery, she says she'll wait. I quickly contacted James and said, my mother is at my office. Brookie, would you like me to come down there? A birthday. No, but could you remain on the phone? I'm going to go talk to her. You got this. I strolled down to the lobby, my shoes tapping across the marble floor. Mom sat in one of the leather seats, clutching her bag in her lap, looking smaller and older than I recalled. When she noticed me, she stood up hurriedly. Emma, thank God. I had been trying to reach you for weeks. I understand. I've purposefully ignored you. I maintained a professional tone, mindful that we were in public. What do you want? I want to talk to my daughter. Can we go somewhere private, or not? Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Mom looked around at the other people in the lobby, and the receptionist was plainly listening. Emma, please. This is embarrassing. You know what was embarrassing? Having you attempt to take my wedding gift in front of 180 guests. So, pardon me if I'm not especially concerned about your comfort right now. 3 months later, Mom arrived at our new home unexpectedly. James answered the door. I need to speak with my daughter, she said. Emma's not interested in speaking with you, he said quietly. I am her mother. You can't keep me from her. I am not withholding you from anyone. She's making her own decision. If that changes, she will contact you. Mom tried to get past him, but James remained still in the doorway, his arms crossed. Mrs. Caldwell, you must leave now. Bethany lost her job again, Mom lamented. She can barely manage the payments on that second-hand automobile. If Emma would just... About simply what? Bail her out again? Give her money. Buy her a new automobile. James's voice was harsh. Your girls are grown-ups. Megan's issues are not Emma's to solve. Please, I know I made mistakes, but she's cutting off her entire family over one argument. Bree, it wasn't just one dispute. It has been 30 years of being regarded like an ATM and an afterthought. You're not allowed to diminish that. I stared from the upstairs window as Mom eventually went, her shoulders slumping. A part of me felt guilty. A part of me felt liberated. James discovered me a few minutes later. Are you okay? Yeah, I answered with sincerity. I'm actually really okay. 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter from Megan, not a text or email, but a handwritten letter that came at our house, in which she apologized sincerely, and without reason or apology. She claimed she'd begun therapy and was starting to see how Mom's partiality had harmed both of us. She wasn't asking for anything, just wanted me to know she was working on herself. A burger. I did not answer promptly. Instead, I put the letter in a drawer and focused on my life, my job at a nonprofit law clinic, my marriage, and my new friendships with James's family. Eventually, I sent a brief email saying I appreciated her apology and needed more time, to which she responded that she understood. A year after the wedding, Mom sent a card that said, "Missing you," and had her signature. I tossed it away, then found it in the garbage an hour later. I wasn't ready to forgive her. But I saved the card. Maybe someday. James and I began discussing having children soon, and I had previously promised him that if we had more than one child, We would never play favorites. He smiled and said, "That's literally the easiest promise I'll ever make to you." The Mercedes GLE 500 that his parents gave me was donated within a week of the wedding, and the title was transferred to the women's shelter, which auctioned it for their programs. My new one, a gorgeous silver Mercedes GLE 500 with every upgrade imaginable, sits in our garage, titled in both of our names, with a legal document on file stating that it cannot be transferred without both of us signing. When I drive past the places where Mom used to take Megan for their weekly lunch dates, a tradition I was never invited to, I don't feel angry anymore. Instead, I feel sad for the relationship we could have had if she'd been able to love both her daughters equally. It's excessive and probably legally unnecessary, but it makes me feel safe. But I also feel glad for a spouse who stood up for me, for in-laws who love me like family, and for finally standing up for myself, even if it meant losing my mother and sister. Jessica once asked if I regretted causing such a spectacle at my wedding, and I told her the truth. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to do it. My wedding day was supposed to be about starting a new life, but it didn't go as planned. I learned that sometimes the best gift you can give yourself isn't a car, a dress, or a perfect ceremony, but rather boundaries that are enforced loudly enough that everyone can hear. Megan's therapist reportedly informed her that her mother has narcissistic tendencies and that the golden child scapegoat relationship is typical. I could have told her that without a therapy, but I'm pleased she's receiving assistance. Every year on our anniversary, James and I return to the Whitaker estate, where we were married. We stand in the garden where we made our vows and remember everything. Not just the beautiful parts, but also the difficult parts, where we agreed that our marriage would be different, that we would protect each other, and that we would never allow anyone, including family, to treat us with less respect than we deserve. The Mercedes incident developed a strange kind of mythology in our social group. People still bring it up at parties. Remember how Emma's mother attempted to take her wedding gift at the real ceremony? They laugh about it today, but with a sympathetic edge, sharing their own tales of unpleasant family members, and Jessica still retains the tape from that night. And when I'm feeling unsure about my decisions, I watch it to remind myself that I wasn't insane or cruel. I was finally advocating for myself. Megan texted me to ask if I wanted to donate to a present, which I gently denied. She said all right, and didn't push, so I guess that's progress. Some people think I'm harsh for cutting off my mother over a car, but they don't realize it was never about the car. The automobile was only the most obvious manifestation of a lifetime habit, and it was the moment that finally broke through my indoctrination to be the nice daughter who never complained. James understands, as does his sister Sophia, and even my uncle who escorted me down the aisle phoned me a few months later to express his admiration for my ability to advocate for myself. He claimed he had seen my mother prefer Megan for years and felt helpless to intervene. My parents gave my room to my stepsister, but she smashed a wall and ended up paralyzed. Now I'm living my best life, knowing they can't do anything. I want this room. Can't I have it? Victoria, my new stepsister, questioned, pointing to my bedroom. I laughed, believing it was a joke. I have that room from age 6. My mom and I placed butterfly decals on the walls before she died. She was informed the guest room is next door. She faced Dad. Butterfly and pink are my favorites. She entered my bedroom and stroked my mom's antique vanity desk. This suits my cosmetics collection. Please. Also, the guest room has few closets. She smiled sweetly, fakely, and continued. You can consider it your gift to me. New family. New beginnings. I looked at Dad, expecting for him to respond. Anything. Instead, he approached me and asked, "Would you mind giving up your room for your new sibling? She really wants it. If you agree, I'll give you the garage. Decorate, refurbish, and bring your mom's stuff down there." The garage was roughly 3 times my bedroom, and I was alone on the first level. It was perfect. I smiled and hugged him. Deal. Victoria giggled when she learned I was sent to the garage and instructed me to leave my mom's pink room. It took 4 months to turn that dirty garage into my ideal room. Built-in bookshelves, a reading corner with floor cushions, fairy lights between the rafters, and a workstation with a garden view via our new window. I put a little projector near my bed for movie nights and put photographs of myself and my mom there. All my buddies started going there and schoolmates boast. Victoria's expression darkened as she saw it. She shouted in our parents' room. I have a bedroom while she has a studio. She said, This isn't fair. I'm the new sibling. I should get the nice things, right? My stepmom groaned and glanced at my dad. Maybe we can move rooms one final time. Dad didn't cave this time. She spent her own money decorating and remodeling the room. The garage is hers. You get your requested pink bedroom. Discussion over. Victoria hyperventilated after losing. She paused. Fine. Keep your stupid garage. Not needed. That seemed to conclude it. For 2 weeks, Victoria obsessively improved the pink room. She bought pricey professional LED strips that synced to music, put a built-in vanity, and set a small bar outside her room to outdo my garage. Dad had to use his credit card to pay her ideas to preserve the peace, but nothing seemed to please her. She'd pull visitors upstairs to show them her renovations, then storm away when they demanded to see the legendary garage room. She realized she needed more room for her. Creativity. Victoria faked illness and remained home as my parents and I celebrated my cousin's graduation. She watched from the window as we drove away before taking a sledgehammer into her room and smashing the wall between the pink and guest bedrooms to make one big room. For 4 seconds, the pink guest room wall fell like she planned. Then the unsupported ceiling beam moved. The neighbors heard lightning-like cracking. Drywall, insulation, and a huge ceiling joist collapsed. Victoria glanced up to see it approaching, but couldn't dive quickly enough. She was trapped by the beam at her skull base. She was awake and screaming for aid, but we were hours from home. She was stuck for 4 hours before our neighbors contacted 911. She repeated, "I can't feel anything," the paramedic remarked. We arrived 7 hours later and waited at the hospital for surgery. Doctor left after an hour to confirm. Victoria would never lower her neck again. She'd need a ventilator to breathe. 24-hour care. She will never walk or do anything independently again at 19. When she could talk via the ventilator, she requested to see me. She could seek comfort or assistance. She muttered, "You made me feel like I had to compete for space in my own house. I'll never paint my nails, try on clothing, or use a phone again. I simply wanted to join in the family." Stepmom blamed me and Dad, asking, "Why couldn't you have shared your room? Why didn't you offer to paint her bedroom when you saw how much she desired a cool room?" The top level was locked off. Victoria moved into the garage because it was the only space large enough for all her medical equipment. I thought that was the end until yesterday, when an insurance investigator called to say they found something odd in Victoria's search history the week before her paralysis. I'm headed to the police station. The ventilator made its usual whooshing sound every few seconds, and I'd been counting the cycles without thinking about it. I grabbed my phone and saw a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as Ethan Parker from the insurance company, sounding polite and scripted. He said they were reopening the case and needed me to come to the police station this afternoon to answer some questions. My hands started shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I said, "Okay," and wrote down the address, even though I already knew where it was. After hanging up, I stared at Victoria's face. Her eyes were closed, and she looked peaceful, which felt wrong given what I just heard. I stood up too fast and felt dizzy. I went into the kitchen, where Dad was drinking coffee and Rebecca was making toast, and told them about the call. Rebecca's face went white for 2 seconds, then to angry. Her voice got louder as she demanded to know what lies I'd told the insurance company to make them suspicious. Dad just stared at his coffee mug like it had answers written on the bottom. He said we should cooperate fully, give them whatever they need. His voice was flat and exhausted, like he'd used up all his energy just getting through the past few weeks. Rebecca started arguing, but Dad held up his hand, and she stopped. I grabbed my jacket from the door hook and found my keys in my backpack, got in my car, and drove to the police station. While passing my old high school, I remembered how great I felt a few months earlier when I finished the garage makeover and had all my friends over. The fairy lights shone off the new window and made everything lovely. Everyone kept saying it was the coolest room they'd ever seen, better than anything on Pinterest or Instagram. They took pictures and posted them with captions about how lucky I was. That pride felt poisonous now, sitting heavy in my chest. Maybe I had shown off too much. Maybe I pushed Victoria over some invisible edge by having something she wanted so badly. I parked in the police station lot and turned off the engine. I sat there for 5 minutes trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking. I kept thinking about what search history they could have found to reopen the case. I finally got out of the car and went inside. I sat down and tried to remember the collapse day. We left at noon for my cousin's graduation ceremony. Victoria said she had a headache and wanted to stay home. I remembered her watching us pack the car from her bedroom window. The neighbor's frantic call came around 4 p.m. After hearing a huge cracking sound and seeing dust from our upstairs windows, the paramedics told us Victoria had been trapped for at least 4 hours, conscious and terrified, unable to move or call for help. Thinking about those 4 hours, what she must have felt lying there, knowing something was horribly wrong with her body, turned my stomach. About 10 minutes later, Detective Olivia Cruz came out and walked straight toward me. She introduced herself as Detective Olivia Cruz and shook my hand firmly. Her eyes were kind but serious. She led me down a hallway to a small interview room that smelled like old coffee and cleaning solution. I accidentally touched the metal, cold table. She brought me a chair and sat across the table, explaining that this was an informative interview and that I may have a parent or attorney present. Detective Cruz pulled out a notebook and asked me to describe the family dynamics before the accident. I tried to explain how Rebecca always took Victoria's side in every argument or disagreement. How Dad attempted to preserve peace by giving in to Victoria, even when it wasn't fair. How I felt squeezed out of my own family when they were married. My voice trembled as I recounted my mom's butterfly decals we made when I was tiny. Victoria covered them with her expensive LED strips that synced to music. The detective took notes without looking at me, just nodding occasionally. She asked when things started getting worse between us. I explained about the garage trade and how Victoria got angrier after seeing how nice I made it. Then she asked about the garage renovation costs and timeline. I told the detective I'd saved 8 months of paychecks from my part-time library job, bought the materials at Home Depot, and decorated mostly alone. Dad helped with the window installation on weekends because it required actual construction work. The detective wrote something down and asked if we got window permits. My chest tightened because I didn't know. I told her Dad handled that part, or at least I thought he did. I worked on making everything seem lovely while he handled the formal stuff. She made another note and my anxiousness rose. Detective Cruz turned her iPad toward me. She showed me a preliminary report from Ethan Parker, the insurance investigator, and explained that routine device forensics revealed search history that raised red flags. Insurance companies check devices in major structural damage claims to rule out fraud. I nodded, even though I didn't understand why this mattered for Victoria's accident. She looked silly attempting to bring down a wall. The investigator turned the tablet toward me and showed me Victoria's laptop search phrases from 6 days before the fall. My blood went cold. Each search term felt like a punch. She asked if I knew Victoria was planning any construction projects. I shook my head and the room spun a little. I told Detective Cruz that Victoria never wanted to demolish walls, just buy decorations and complain that her room wasn't big enough to compete with mine. He asked me to walk through the day of the accident again, specifically what time we left and who knew we'd be gone. I told her we left around noon for the graduation party. Victoria knew because she'd watched us pack the car from her bedroom window. I remember her face in the glass looking pale and unhappy. I thought she was mad about missing the party, but now I wonder if she was nervous about what she was planning to do. Detective Cruz shifted in her chair and pulled up a new tablet screen. She asked if I hired contractors or did all the garage renovation work myself. I told her I bought the materials and decorated, painting the walls and installing the shelves and fairy lights on my own. Dad helped with the window, which required cutting through the wall and framing it. She nodded and wrote something down, then asked who did the electrical work for all the lights and the projector outlet. I told the investigator Dad ran new wiring from the house's main electrical panel, and the detective glanced up and asked whether we had building permits. I didn't know, so my stomach fell. She made more notes on her tablet and said the insurance company would need to verify that all the work was done legally and up to code. I got sweaty palms because I wasn't sure Dad had gotten permits. Detective Cruz closed that screen and opened another, asking whether Victoria ever threatened to harm or destroy my garage. I shook my head and answered no, nothing like that. She regularly complained about how unfair the room arrangement was, how I had this vast space while she was confined in an ordinary bedroom. We didn't fight, just average step-sibling tension and passive-aggressive remarks when her friends were over. The detective asked if Rebecca ever suggested Victoria should get the garage instead of me. I didn't want to call Rebecca out, but he was waiting for an answer. I admitted that Rebecca often complained about me having too much space, saying things like it wasn't fair that one kid got a studio apartment while her daughter had to fit everything into a bedroom. She never said Victoria should take the garage from me, but she implied I was selfish for keeping such a large space to myself. The detective's voice quieted and she asked me to repeat what Victoria said at the hospital when she accused me. Victoria claimed I made her feel useless and invisible, that she only wanted to belong in the family, but I had to have the coolest room and all the attention. I started shivering because I wondered if she was correct, if I had been showing off with the garage and pushed her into doing something desperate. Detective Cruz softly asked whether I thought I caused the accident. I responded I didn't know anymore. Everyone kept saying if I had shared my room or helped Victoria decorate hers, none of this would have happened. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was selfish and needed to be a better sister. Detective Cruz closed her iPad and laid it on the table between us. She said there could be several legal issues around the demolition depending on what the full investigation revealed. If Victoria intended to damage the house, that could be one thing. If my garage renovation was done without permits, that was a code violation. If anyone else planned or knew about the demolition, that raised other questions. Even if Victoria only endangered herself by knocking down a load-bearing wall, reckless endangerment was serious. When I realized she was talking about criminal charges, my mouth dropped. I asked if Victoria could go to jail, and the detective said probably not given her current condition, but the family could face fines and legal consequences. Rebecca could face issues if she knew about or encouraged the demolition plan. The detective asked if I would consent to having my phone and laptop examined by their tech team to verify that I wasn't involved in Victoria's plans. I agreed immediately, unlocking my phone and sliding it across the table. I also gave her my laptop password, desperate to prove I didn't know what Victoria was planning. Detective Cruz thanked me and said a tech specialist would make copies of everything and return my devices within 48 hours. She stood up and shook my hand again, saying I was free to go and they would be in touch if they had more questions. I grabbed my keys and left the interview room, my legs shaky and weird. I left the police station at 6 p.m., hands still trembling as I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to process everything the detective said about permits, fraud and criminal charges. I texted Dad that the interview was over, but it was intense. He responded an hour later with, "Okay," and nothing else. No inquiries about what they requested or how I felt. I went home, stopped into our driveway, and sat for 20 minutes watching the garage lights shine through the glass. The space that had made me proud now seemed wrong. The next morning, I was pouring cereal in the kitchen when Dad's phone rang. He answered and his face went from confused to pale as he listened to the caller. After he hung up, he told me and Rebecca to sit at the table. Dad's voice was flat as he read from his notes from the conversation. Victoria had inquired, "How long does an insurance claim take? What happens if you destroy a house without a permit, and does homeowners insurance cover accidental demolition?" Rebecca started crying immediately, saying Victoria couldn't have understood what those searches meant. She was just a kid researching random things. But I could see in Dad's face that he knew what I knew, that Victoria had been planning this and thinking about the insurance angle. Later that morning, Ethan sent a follow-up email with more details from the forensics report. Dad opened it on his laptop, and we all crowded around to read. Victoria had also searched, "Can you get in trouble for knocking down the wrong bar?" and structural damage insurance payout average, 2 days before the disaster. This indication that Victoria had thought through the repercussions and bet that Dad's insurance would heal anything went wrong made me ill. Victoria planned her sledgehammer grab and calculated that insurance would save her if things went wrong, according to the investigator's report. The morning of the accident, when we left for my cousin's graduation, Victoria had searched how to fake being sick convincingly and best excuses to skip family event before telling us she had a headache. Dad read this part out loud and Rebecca muttered. Victoria had planned, researched and prepared for this whole thing, but she was 19 and probably thought she could just knock down a wall and have a bigger, cooler room by the time we got home. I spent the afternoon in my car in the library parking lot where I used to work before everything happened. She didn't plan to become paralyzed or have the ceiling collapse on her, so I wasn't sure if knowing she planned it made it better or worse. My phone buzzed around 7 o'clock that evening while I was still in the parking lot, and Detective Cruz's name lit up the screen. I answered, and she said the neighbors had given another statement about something they remembered from 3 days before the accident. A delivery truck had dropped off a package at our house, and the neighbor watched Victoria sign for it through their kitchen window. Detective Cruz asked if Dad had ordered anything recently, and I put her on speaker so I could drive home. He scrolled through his laptop's order history from the past month, shaking his head. No sledgehammer, no tools, nothing heavy delivered to the house. Detective Cruz speculated that Victoria had ordered the sledgehammer herself using someone else's account or card. planning the demolition days in advance. The detective noted that the neighbor's statement showed clear preparation, not a sudden angry impulse. Victoria had time to think about what she was doing and time to stop, but she ordered the tool and waited for it. The neighbor also reported the sounds they heard the day everything happened. Detective Cruz read from her notes, explaining how the neighbor was doing dishes around 1 p.m. when they heard music playing upstairs at our house, loud enough to hear through the walls. At first they thought Victoria was just being a teenager blasting music while we were gone, but around 1:30, they heard rhythmic pounding, like someone hammering on something hard. The neighbor almost went over to check, but they thought Victoria was hanging pictures or doing a craft project. The pounding stopped and started for over 2 hours, and the neighbor got used to it. Then at 3:30, they heard a massive cracking noise that shook their whole house, followed by a huge crash, and then silence. They called 911. I imagined Victoria swinging that sledgehammer for hours, taking breaks when her arms got tired, then starting again. My throat tightened as I thought about how someone could have stopped her if they'd just knocked on the door, or if the neighbor had trusted their gut and checked on the noise. But nobody did, and she kept going until the ceiling fell on her. Detective Cruz called us again 2 days later with more bank records. Rebecca had given them permission to look at her credit card statements, probably thinking it would clear things up. Instead, they found that Rebecca's card was used to buy the vanity, LED strips, and sledgehammer from the same hardware store over 3 weeks. Rebecca turned white when she saw the printed statements when the detective came to the house to talk to us about it. She claimed she never approved buying a sledgehammer and only knew about the vanity and lights because Victoria showed her after they arrived. She also claimed that Victoria must have taken her card from her purse and used it without asking since they lived together. But Dad looked at Rebecca differently after hearing this, his eyes narrowed and his jaw tight. I could see him doing the math in his head, wondering how much Rebecca actually knew, and how much she was pretending not to know. The detective said the credit card records supported the theory that Victoria prepared everything she needed over weeks, not days. Detective Cruz then showed us text messages from 8 days before the accident between Rebecca and Victoria from Victoria's phone backup. Rebecca wrote, "You need to make it impossible for them to ignore how unfair this is." Victoria replied, "I have a plan." Rebecca sent additional comments about how I got everything I wanted and Victoria got leftovers. Victoria sent back room design screenshots with captions like, "This is what I deserve and why does she get the cool space?" Rebecca broke down as she read her own remarks on the detective's screen and cried, stating she merely meant Victoria should decorate more and make her room lovely, not pull down walls. Detective Cruz said calmly that the text messages encouraged Victoria to escalate the situation, even if Rebecca didn't know the plan. Victoria felt justified in taking extreme action because her mom kept telling her she deserved more. Sitting there listening to all this, I started remembering things differently. Rebecca insisted Dad fund Victoria's room improvements, saying, "She needs to feel equal in this family, and you can't let one daughter have everything while the other has nothing." I thought she was protecting her child, who felt left out. But now, I could see how she fed Victoria's anger and made it grow bigger, validating every complaint and making it seem like I was the enemy. Rebecca never once suggested that Victoria should be grateful for having a nice room at all, or that maybe comparing ourselves constantly was unhealthy. Instead, she kept pointing out everything I had that Victoria didn't, keeping score like we were in some kind of competition. I felt this flash of real anger at her, hot and sharp in my chest, because she helped create this whole disaster by telling Victoria she was right to feel cheated. On day 4 of the investigation, a woman, named Sarah Matthews showed up at our house with a clipboard and a serious expression. She introduced herself as a structural engineer hired by the insurance company to assess the damage and figure out exactly what happened. Dad let her in and she went straight upstairs to the sealed-off area, spending the next 3 hours up there. I could hear her walking around, taking measurements and occasionally talking into a voice recorder. When she returned downstairs, her face looked grim, and she asked if we could all sit in the living room. She spread out photos on the coffee table of the collapsed ceiling and the demolished wall, then pointed at them while she talked. The wall Victoria knocked down was load-bearing, supporting the second-floor ceiling joists. Without it, the structure above it would collapse. Sarah Matthews explains that our house was built in 1987 with a structural design that supported the roof and second floor. She showed us the city's original building plans and showed us how the pink bedroom guest room wall was marked as structural, not decorative. She asked Dad if he'd gotten any permits for alterations upstairs, and Dad's face flushed red as he admitted he didn't think permits were needed for interior cosmetic changes like paint and decorations. Sarah said that demolishing any wall, especially a load-bearing one, required permits and that the ceiling beam had to carry too much weight and collapsed within hours. The engineer walked through the first floor and stopped in my garage space, looking around carefully. She stopped at my window, which Dad and I installed so I could see the garden, and asked when we put it in and if we got a permit. Performing it without approval was a serious code violation that put everyone in the house at risk. Dad's face turned red to purple, and he stammered that he didn't get a permit, thinking the window was small enough. Sarah wrote on her clipboard that adding any opening to an exterior wall required a permit because it affected the building envelope and could cause structural or moisture problems. She said the city would likely require us to get permits for both violations now. Dad just nodded, looking defeated, while I felt sick thinking about how much this was all going to cost. A few days later, a hospital social worker named Lucas Harper arrived to follow up on Victoria's home care situation and make sure we had what we needed. Lucas, likely in his 40s, reviewed Victoria's equipment for an hour, including the ventilator humming in the corner, the feeding tube supplies on shelves, and the adjustable bed taking up most of the garage. He asked about our daily routine, who was doing what care tasks, and how we were managing overnight. Then he sat down with all three of us and gently said that this arrangement wasn't sustainable long-term without professional nursing support. Rebecca snapped that we were doing our best with no help and no money. Lucas held up his hands and said calmly that he understood. Rebecca stayed in the kitchen after Lucas left instead of checking on Victoria. As I got a glass of water, I heard her start crying. She leaned against the counter and said she'd lost her beautiful upstairs bedroom and now lived in a house that felt like a hospital with machines beeping all day and night. Then she looked at me with red, swollen eyes and said the garage was supposed to be my punishment for being selfish, a way to teach me I couldn't always get what I wanted. Instead, it became Victoria's prison, the only room big enough for all her equipment, and her daughter would spend the rest of her life there. I stood there holding my water glass, not knowing if I should say something comforting or just walk away, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and anger that she was still punishing me. I walked away without saying anything, and went to my temporary sleeping space in the den, feeling a heavy chest pressure that made it hard to breathe. My phone buzzed around 11 p.m., saw Lucas's name on the screen, and I responded while staring at the ceiling in the dark. His calm, attentive voice inquired how I was handling everything, and I admitted that everyone appeared to blame me for not sharing my room from the start. I told him how Rebecca kept saying I should have helped Victoria decorate and how Dad occasionally looked at me like I could have avoided this, but I spoke too quickly. Lucas let me finish before gently saying that Victoria made her own choices and that I was allowed to feel hurt by being made the scapegoat. Hearing that from someone outside the family made my throat tighten, and I had to swallow hard before I could thank him and hang up. The next morning, Detective Cruz called Dad's phone and asked us to sit down in the living room because she had another finding. Cruz explained that Victoria's phone had a draft Instagram post dated the morning of the accident, and she read the caption aloud. Room transformation reveal coming today, with hashtags for home renovation and room makeovers. Rebecca perched on the couch, looking defensive. The detective said Victoria planned to film the demolition and post it as a dramatic before and after story. I felt sick thinking about Victoria setting up her phone to record, expecting to show off some amazing renovation instead of being paralyzed. Rebecca choked and covered her mouth with both hands. Detective Cruz pulled up something else on her tablet and said Victoria had written a video script. Why not go large when my dad's insurance can fix anything? The detective explained this showed Victoria's magical thinking about insurance, how she believed it would cover any damage without real consequences. I sat there angry at how stupid Victoria was and sad that she thought this would work out fine. Dad's face went pale and he shook his head slowly like he couldn't process what he was hearing. Rebecca started crying again, these quiet tears running down her face while she stared at the floor. Detective Cruz then turned to Rebecca and said the text messages showed something else important. When Victoria expressed doubts about the plan, Rebecca wrote back that Dad's insurance was really good and she shouldn't worry. Rebecca snapped up and said she didn't know Victoria was planning to demolish anything, that they were just talking about decorating ideas. But the detective calmly said the text created an environment where Victoria felt protected from consequences and believed insurance would magically fix whatever went wrong. Dad looked at Rebecca with a look I'd never seen before, like he was seeing her for the first time and didn't like what he saw. The room went quiet except for Victoria's ventilator humming from the garage. After Detective Cruz left, Dad walked out to his car and sat there. I watched him through the window before going back to my homework. Rebecca went to check on Victoria, leaving me alone in the home feeling like everything was breaking apart slowly. Dad came inside after dark and claimed he wanted to sleep because he couldn't handle anything. The next day at school, I saw that my friend group had shrunk to just 2 people who still sat with me at lunch. Everyone else found reasons to be busy or just walked past without making eye contact. Between classes, I heard whispers about the paralyzed stepsister and the garage room drama. Someone had spray-painted garage influencer on my locker in silver paint, so I had to get the janitor to help me scrub it off while other students stared. I ate lunch in my car for the rest of the week, sitting in the parking lot with a terrible sandwich. I seriously considered transferring to a different school for senior year, thinking I could start over somewhere nobody knew about this. A week after the big meeting with Detective Cruz, the neighbors gave another statement to the police. Dad got a call to come down to the station, and when he did, his face was gray and tired. He told us the neighbors had seen Rebecca carrying paint samples and measuring tape upstairs 3 days before the accident, talking with Victoria about making the space work better. Detective Cruz asked Rebecca about this, and Rebecca admitted she was helping Victoria plan the layout for a combined room, but she swore she didn't know about the demolition plan. Dad repeated the detective's words about how the pattern of enabling was becoming impossible to deny. 2 days later, Ethan Parker from the insurance company called while we were eating dinner. Dad put him on speaker, and Ethan's careful, formal voice filled the kitchen. He said the insurance company was likely denying the structural damage claim because the demolition was intentional and done illegally without permits. Dad's face went gray as he asked about appeals and exceptions, but Ethan kept explaining the policy language in his calm, professional voice. I watched Dad's hands start shaking as he wrote notes, and his handwriting got messier as the call went on. The next morning, the insurance company sent an official letter confirming they would continue covering Victoria's medical care and equipment under the health policy, but we were responsible for the home repair costs. Ethan Parker called again to walk through the numbers, estimating $80,000 to $120,000 to properly repair the upstairs structure, plus city fines for unpermitted work. Dad slumped in his chair with his head in his hands and shoulders bowed forward, as if to shrink. Rebecca began inquiring about payment plans and loans, her voice growing more anxious with each statement. I excused myself and went to my temporary sleeping space, closing the door on their voices. That night, I lay awake in the den, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the times Rebecca had pressured Dad to give Victoria the garage. She said things like, "You're choosing your daughter over my daughter." I debated telling Detective Cruz about those conversations to add to the evidence of Rebecca's push and enablement of this disaster, but I didn't want to make things worse for a family that was already falling apart. I kept debating if remaining silent was shielding individuals who had blamed me for everything, or if speaking up was retribution disguised as honesty. The next morning, Detective Cruz phoned to urge us to return to the station. Dad and Rebecca rode together while I drove alone, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. We sat in the same interview room when Detective Cruz pulled out her tablet again, her face serious. She said they found more messages on Rebecca's phone, these ones to her sister from 3 weeks before the accident. First communication from Rebecca. "Maya must do something drastic to show them how unjust this is. A big gesture that forces change." Her sister replied, "Be careful what you encourage." Rebecca's response made my stomach drop. Sometimes you have to shake things up to get results. I felt sick reading it, but also relieved because it proved Rebecca had pushed this whole thing. Dad's face went pale, and he looked at Rebecca like he didn't recognize her. Rebecca started crying and said she didn't mean Victoria should destroy anything. She just wanted her to speak up more. Detective Cruz let her finish, then explained that while the messages were bad, proving criminal intent for insurance fraud or contributing to minor delinquency required Rebecca to know about the demolition plan. The texts showed bad judgment and enabling behavior, but the burden of proof was high, and prosecutors were unlikely to charge a mother whose daughter was paralyzed. The detective's voice was kind but firm, like she wanted us to understand the legal reality, even if it felt unfair. Dad asked if Rebecca wouldn't face any consequences, and Detective Cruz said they were already happening, just not criminal ones. We drove home in silence, and I went straight to my temporary room in the den. 2 days later, Jason Taylor from the city building department knocked on our door with a clipboard to inspect the property after the structural collapse report. Jason spent an hour upstairs inspecting the sealed-off area, taking photos and making notes. When he came down, He handed Dad a violation notice listing unpermitted demolition upstairs and unpermitted window installation in the garage. He explained that wall removal required permits and inspections, and adding a window to an exterior wall needed approval. He outlined a plan where we had to hire a. Dad's hand shook as he signed the notice, and Jason said he was sorry, but the city had to enforce the codes. After he left, Dad sat at the kitchen table staring at the violation notice, doing math in his head to figure out how much it would cost. Rebecca came downstairs and asked what happened. When Dad showed her the notice, she started crying again, saying they couldn't afford it. I went back to my room because I couldn't handle watching them fall apart. The next afternoon, hospital social worker Lucas Harper returned. He brought a thick folder of paperwork and sat down with us in the living room to explain his care plan proposal, which included 12 hours of Medicaid-covered in-home nursing care from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Family members would have to work the remaining shifts overnight, but he had trained us. Lucas told Rebecca and Dad about ventilator management, feeding tube care, and how to position Victoria to prevent bed sores. The training began next week and required 45 hours of classroom and practical work. Dad took notes while Lucas talked, asking about schedules and what happened if someone got sick. Rebecca sat quietly, not asking anything. Dad and I attended the first caregiver training class at the hospital the following Tuesday. Rebecca called that morning to say she was unwell. Lucas left copies of all the papers and said he'd call in a few days to check the schedule. The instructor, a 20-year ventilator nurse, had us practice on mannequins to suction Victoria's breathing tube when secretions built up. I felt awkward holding the suction catheter and worried I'd hurt someone. Dad's hands shook the whole time, but he kept trying and asking the instructor to show him again when he made a mistake. We learned how to check the ventilator settings, understand the alarms, and respond to problems. The instructor made us practice each skill until we could do it without thinking. After the 3-hour session, my back hurt from bending over the mannequin. Dad thanked the instructor and wrote down the next session's date in his phone. I was exhausted, and Detective Cruz was waiting by my car. She wanted to catch me alone. She whispered, "Keep track of any concerning interactions at home just in case." I knew she was worried about Rebecca's blame patterns worsening. I nodded and said I would. That night, I opened a new note on my phone and titled it Journal, adding the date to the first entry. I wrote down what Rebecca said that morning about being too sick for training and how she blamed me again yesterday for making Victoria feel competitive. It felt weird documenting my family like suspects, but Detective Cruz wouldn't have suggested it without a reason. 3 nights later, Victoria's ventilator alarm beeped. I got up and went to the garage, my eyes adjusting to the dim health equipment glow. Victoria was awake and watching me as I approached. I examined the ventilator display and noticed it was only a position alert. She muttered via the speaking valve that she didn't think the ceiling could fall. She said she wanted a bigger room like mine and thought Dad's insurance would fix any small problems. Then her face hardened, and she said she wouldn't have felt so desperate to compete if I hadn't made such a big deal about the garage. I didn't argue or defend myself, just adjusted her pillow and reset the alarm. As I moved around the bed, her eyes followed me, and I wondered if she believed what she was saying, or if it was easier to say than the truth. Walking back to the den, I realized Victoria's blame was the only way she could cope with being trapped in a body that didn't work anymore. She couldn't accept that her own choices did this because that would mean she destroyed her own life for nothing. It was easier to blame me, to have someone to be angry at instead of drowning in regret. I wrote this in my journal, noting the time and what she said. Dad consented to meet with Grace Walker, a family attorney, 3 weeks after my initial police interview. Her office was in a huge downtown building with big windows overlooking the city. In her conference room, she read through all the evidence we brought, text messages, violation notices, insurance denial letter, for an hour before telling us criminal charges were unlikely. The optics were terrible, but she continued. We should expect the insurance denial to stand. Child Protective Services may provide family support if the city fines proceed. Grace told Dad we could appeal, but the insurance policy language was clear about intentional damage. She then explained our options for city violations and how to work with CPS if they showed up. I made a decision right then and interrupted Grace. I told her everything about Rebecca's pressure tactics, how she'd pushed Dad to give Victoria the garage and enabled every escalating demand Victoria made. Dad looked uncomfortable, but I kept talking about how Rebecca made Dad feel bad for having limits, and how she supported Victoria's pricey room upgrades while complaining that I had too much space. Grace noted that this context was important for understanding family dynamics, even if it didn't change the legal outcome. She suggested family mediation once the crisis stabilized, saying we needed a neutral third party to help work through all the blame and resentment. Dad agreed to consider it and we scheduled another meeting for 2 weeks later. 3 days later, Detective Cruz called while I was making lunch and asked if we could all come in Friday at 2 p.m. for a final meeting about the investigation. She said representatives from the insurance company, city building department and social services would present their findings and recommendations. I told her we'd be there and hung up. Feeling weird like this was the last chapter of something, but I didn't know if it ended well or badly. Dad took the day off work for the meeting, and we drove to the police station in silence, Rebecca staring out the window. Detective Cruz sat at the head of the conference room with her tablet and documents laid out in front of her. It was larger than the interview room. Detective Cruz thanked everyone for coming and said she wanted to walk through the timeline so everyone understood what happened and why. She pulled up her tablet and turned it toward us. She said Victoria researched load-bearing walls and sledgehammer demolition 6 days before the collapse, insurance coverage for accidental damage 2 days later, and how to fake being sick convincingly the morning of the collapse. Detective Cruz spoke calmly, presenting facts without judgment. She presented the neighbor's sledgehammer delivery testimony and the demolition schedule, showing how Victoria smashed the wall for nearly 2 hours before it fell. She then pulled up the text messages between Rebecca and Victoria, in which Rebecca wrote about making it impossible to ignore how unfair things were and told Victoria not to worry about insurance. Rebecca sat still next to Dad, her hands folded on the table, not looking at the screen. Dad took out a pen and started writing on a legal pad, shaking his hand so much that his writing was unclear. Ethan explained that the insurance company was denying the structural damage claim because of intentional demolition and unpermitted work. He said the policy clearly excluded coverage for damage caused deliberately by household members, even if they didn't understand the consequences. His voice was matter of fact, not mean, but not sympathetic, explaining business decisions. Jason listed the city breaches, including unpermitted upstairs demolition and garage window construction. We'd need a certified contractor, permits, and 90 days to bring everything up to code. He gave Dad a stack of documents to complete and fined him $4,000 plus cleanup. I saw Dad write numbers and dates on his notepad like he was solving a math problem. Detective Cruz cleared her throat and explained the police were not recommending criminal charges after analyzing all the information. She said Victoria's actions were reckless and poor judgment, but she was already facing life-changing consequences that were worse than any criminal penalty. The detective said there wasn't enough evidence that Rebecca knew about the demolition plan, just that she encouraged Victoria's general escalation. Ethan confirmed that Victoria's health insurance coverage would continue, so everything Jason added that the city wouldn't pursue additional penalties if we started remediation within 30 days. I felt like I wanted someone to be punished but didn't want things to get worse. Lucas set his bag on the table and said he needed to address something based on the investigation into our family situation. He said he was referring us to Child Protective Services for voluntary support services, not as punishment, but to make sure everyone had access to counseling and help working through everything. CPS could connect us with family therapists, support groups, and resources for managing the stress of caring for Victoria. Rebecca's face crumpled and she started crying, her shoulders shaking as she covered her mouth with both hands. She wanted her daughter to be happy and feel like she belonged in the family. Detective Cruz gently handed Rebecca a box of tissues across the table, saying she understood this was hard for everyone. Dad put his hand on Rebecca's shoulder, but she shrugged and kept crying. After the meeting, everyone handed Dad their reports and paperwork, piling them in front of him until there was a tiny mound. We rose up to leave, and I took my jacket from my chair to return to regular air. Rebecca grabbed my arm and spun me around as we walked through the parking lot to our car, yelling that I was selfish and showing off with the garage that I made Victoria feel so worthless she did something desperate. People getting into their cars nearby turned to look. I stood there frozen as she kept going, saying I could have just shared my room from the start, that I could have helped Victoria decorate instead of making everything a competition. Then her voice broke and she started sobbing, saying she was terrified of losing Victoria, that watching her daughter trapped in a body that didn't work was killing her, that she couldn't handle the guilt of encouraging Victoria, and that she didn't know how to fix any of this. She was crying and saying sorry, but I didn't know if she was apologizing to me, Victoria, or herself. I stood awkwardly with my arms at my sides, not knowing if I should hug her or back away. Dad gently took Rebecca's elbow and guided her to the car. After we had dinner, Dad called me and Rebecca into the living room for a family meeting and told us he was taking a leave of absence from work starting next week to focus on the remediation project and get trained as Victoria's caregiver. He'd already contacted a contractor about the upstairs repairs and see. He showed us the contractor's estimate and the permit timeline, walking us through each step like a project at work. Rebecca nodded along, wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue. After listening, I felt relieved that Dad was actually handling things instead of just shutting down. I took a breath and told Dad and Rebecca that I would help with Victoria's care and house repairs, but I wasn't going to be the only caregiver or the family's punching bag anymore. My voice was calm but firm, like I was drawing a line in the sand. I told them I'd do my part, but I also had school and college applications and my own life to consider. Dad nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. Rebecca looked away toward the window but didn't argue or protest, just sat there quietly. It wasn't a big emotional moment or a breakthrough, just a simple statement of boundaries. 2 days later, Lucas Harper returned with the nursing schedule printed on official letterhead. He explained that a professional aide would cover 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock every day, and family members would split the overnight shifts. He took a tablet Victoria could control with her eye movements and a better speaking valve that worked better with her ventilator out of his luggage and spent an hour teaching us how to set up the eye-gazing software and speaking valve. As the medical equipment was arranged and the new technology made things less dreary, the garage became more like a functioning living area. Lucas left information about paralysis support groups and trauma therapists on the kitchen counter and told Dad to call him if we needed anything else. The next week, Jason Taylor returned with the approved remediation plan in a thick folder. He explained that a licensed contractor would install proper support beams upstairs to replace the one that collapsed and repair all ceiling damage. Jason explained the permit process and inspection schedule, marking dates on a calendar he left with us. Dad signed all the forms at the kitchen table, his signature steady this time. The garage window would be framed and weatherproofed to code, making it legal. The project would take 8 to 10 weeks and cost $85,000, which Dad was financing with a home equity loan. A few days later, the insurance company's final decision letter arrived in a thick envelope. Dad opened it at the kitchen table while I made coffee and watched his face as he read. I thought about how much money that was and how we'd be paying for Victoria's mistake for years. Dad's expression changed as he read the letter, which confirmed that the structural damage claim was denied due to intentional demolition and code violations, as Ethan Parker said at the meeting. The insurance company was providing an $18,000 equipment stipend for Victoria's adaptive technology and home modifications to improve accessibility. Compared to the $85,000 we'd lost, Lucas claimed it would cover a ceiling lift system to help relocate Victoria, and quieter, more dependable ventilator equipment. Dad grinned for the first time in weeks as he read that. After he showed me the letter, I felt a little hopeful that things might get better, even if they never would. That weekend, I reclaimed a small part of the garage for myself by moving some of Victoria's medical equipment to one side and clearing out a corner near the window. I also set up the shelf Dad built for me years ago against the wall. I put Mom's framed photos from our beach trip, her birthday dinner, and the silly selfie we took painting my old room pink on it, along with some of my favorite books, worn copies of fantasy novels I'd read 100 times. It was only 3 feet, but it felt like mine again. Victoria watched me through her eye-gaze tablet, following my movements. I walked over to her bed and told her I wasn't trying to take over her space, just claiming a tiny corner. Her eyes blinked twice, the signal we'd worked out for yes. The next day, I brought Victoria's nail polish collection from my bathroom to her bedside. I'd set up the projector on the wall earlier and loaded one of our favorite mindless comedy movies. I pulled a chair close to her bed and took her limp hand, feeling the weight of it in mine. She couldn't feel my fingers on hers, but she could see everything in the mirror above her bed. I held up 3 bottles and she picked the pale blue. I painted each nail slowly, wiping away mistakes with remover. The movie played in the background, but neither of us watched it. After finishing her left hand, I moved to her right, choosing a sparkly silver because her eyes fell on it. We didn't talk much, just existed in the same space without anger or blame. It felt like the first peaceful moment we'd shared in months. Victoria's voice was thin and mechanical through her speaking valve. She told me she wanted the attention and admiration my garage room got because she felt invisible in the family and thought a dramatic room transformation would make her special. She said she didn't mean for this to happen, but she didn't apologize. I put down the nail polish and looked in the mirror. I told her I was sorry she felt invisible, but what happened wasn't my fault. I understood wanting to feel special and want people to notice her, but she made her own choices with the sledgehammer that day, and I couldn't take responsibility for them. I told her I would assist because she was family, but I couldn't change the past. We had to live with what occurred now, and the only way ahead was being honest about what we could and couldn't give one another. Dad changed after the insurance letter arrived. He bought a huge wall calendar with big squares for each day and hung it in the kitchen. He spent an evening filling it in with different colored markers. Blue for nursing shifts, green for Victoria's therapy appointments, red for permit inspections, and purple for my school schedule. Rebecca entered the kitchen while Dad was working on it and suggested moving my dentist appointment to avoid conflict with Victoria's physical therapy. Dad agreed and thanked her. She volunteered to coordinate morning nursing if Dad worked evening hours. It wasn't warm or pleasant, but it was the first time I'd seen them work together in weeks. 2 months after the police station meeting, the contractor completed the first significant milestone. After installing the new support beams upstairs, the ceiling was structurally sound again. Jason Taylor inspected the work for an hour with his clipboard and measuring tools before coming downstairs to tell us it passed. Viv, he said he was reducing our remaining fines to $2,000 because we were actively following the remediation plan. Dad framed the inspection approval certificate like a diploma and hung it in the hallway. I understood why when I saw him look at it later that night. It was proof we were repairing and moving forward. During my lunch breaks at school, I researched colleges with strong disability support services to help me understand Victoria's situation. I narrowed it down to schools within an hour of home so I could help her while building my own life. Dad discovered me at the kitchen table one night with printouts and helped me fill out the applications. He read my essay on family issues and stated he was proud of me for not giving up on my future. While working together, I realized I could be part of this family and still have boundaries, goals, and dreams. 3 months after the collapse, our house settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal on good days. Victoria had a nursing aide who covered most of the day and family members who split the night shifts. The upstairs repairs were 60% complete, with the contractor working every weekday on the ceiling and walls. Money was tight and would be for years, with the home equity loan payment on Dad's bank statement every month. Family relationships were still fragile, and Rebecca and Dad's conversations were still careful and formal. But we had systems, and everyone was trying in their own way. We were all still attempting to cope with the repercussions of choices taken in rage, fear, and desperation. There were no heroes or villains in this narrative. Parent called me selfish while I paid their bills for years and gave me a milkshake, knowing I'm lactose intolerant. So I canceled all 14 auto pays. For 20 years my family has called me selfish. They had no idea that I had discreetly paid all their bills for 750 days. Was 10 when it started. My mother, Karen, told me to send 90 of my $120 yard sale proceeds to my brother Ryan, since keeping them would be selfish. That word followed me. Was your grade decent? Selfish for not teaching my sibling. Did I buy myself something nice? Selfish for neglecting family. My first stable job came 3 years ago. Karen called me crying the same week. They were banished. Ryan lost another job. Karen's boyfriend, Rick, left, and they needed $3,200 to avoid homelessness. But I know you won't help, she cried. You're too selfish to care if your own family becomes homeless. Weary of paying for anything and being selfish, I paid it behind their back without telling them. Everything fell apart on my 28th birthday. I arrived at their house thrilled since I had a passive income investment for my brother that would have offered years of stability. Ryan answered the door and remarked, "Finally. Did Mom tell you about my laptop situation? Instead of happy birthday?" I stared at him, confused. Rolling his eyes. He gazed at my empty palms. "My MacBook broke 4 months ago, and Mom said she'd tell you to get me a new one for your birthday." "You seriously forgot? How selfish can you be?" Karen joined him. "Your brother needs things, and you only think about yourself." They were standing at the entryway of the house I paid for, dressed in my clothes, about to eat my food, and calling me selfish. They didn't know. Karen posted her spa holiday photos last month. Ryan bought a new gaming setup while calling me selfish for 6 years of driving the same automobile. Mum remarked, "Your brother has just lost his job. How do you expect us to survive if you won't even help your own family?" If only they knew who'd been keeping them from the streets for 2.5 years. Suddenly they gave me my birthday present. Burger King offered a milkshake coupon. Lactose intolerance. They knew this. After 2.5 years of losing money, they gave me a coupon for something bad. Because I needed to breathe. I left first. While sitting in my car, clutching the steering wheel till my knuckles became white, I knew they would find out everything. As I returned up the driveway, my legs felt rubbery, but my mind was clear. "Hey Ryan," I said as he answered the door, my voice so calm it scared me. "Quick question. Who pays your phone bill?" He replied, Rick," as if I was ridiculous for asking. I could hear my heart racing in my ears. "Interesting. What about your gas, health insurance, those $120 weekend food deliveries?" His face changed. Confusion crept in. His grin wavered like a math equation gone wrong. "And Mom," I continued as she neared, my voice growing louder. "Who exactly pays the rent here? The car insurance? That electricity bill that's somehow never late?" The silence was awful. When they faced each other, I could see their thoughts laboring to piece together 2.5 years of lies. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then reopened like an ugly fish seeking oxygen. She said, "Wait," her cheeks turning dull. "But you said Ryan pays?" "And you told me Rick." Ryan's teen-like voice quiver. The awakening was sweet and dreadful. Their eyes opened, their faces white as paper, and I could see it hitting them like a punch. The selfish daughter they'd ridiculed, demanded, and insulted saved them. Every banknote. Every payment. Me. Karen's voice was quiet. "You've been..." I stopped her. I turned and left, leaving them at the doorway, their world shattered. When I turned to them, I smiled. "Oh, and Mom, I'm canceling everything. Unless you do me one favor." "I'll do anything," she pleaded. "Then meet at the link below, Mom." That's where the rest of this story is. I ran back to my car and grabbed my phone before changing my mind. When activating the cloud storage app, my shaky hands nearly dropped it twice. The folder, Family Expenses 2023 to 2025, had every receipt, bank statement, and autopay confirmation by month. I kept track of everything without knowing why. Maybe I knew this day was coming. The running total at the bottom knotted my gut. I clicked share, copied the URL, and sent Karen a fresh text. My heart raced against my ribs as my thumb hovered over the submit button for 10 seconds. When I tapped it, the phrase delivered displayed underneath the message. I started my car and drove away from their house, monitoring my rearview mirror like a criminal. 5 minutes later, my phone went crazy. The screen showed Karen's name first, then Ryan's. My steering wheel knuckles were white as I drove, sending every call to voicemail. Like an angry wasp in a jar, the phone buzzed in the cup holder. I arrived to my apartment building 25 minutes later with 9 missed calls and a ringing voicemail notice. After a minute of breathing in my parking spot, I grabbed my phone and went inside. My apartment seemed quieter, like the air had moved. I drank my water all at once, then filled it and sat on my couch. Voicemail stared at me from the screen. After drinking more water, I pushed play on the first. Karen shrieked in horror, wondering if this was true. Why didn't I tell them I paid for everything? How could I hide this? She spoke rapidly, so I didn't comprehend some. The message terminated at 90 seconds. The second voicemail arrived 30 minutes later, so I checked the clock. It was completely different. Her harsh voice accused me of lying and manipulating them by concealing everything. She stated I deliberately made them look silly to give them something to grasp onto. In a 2-minute remark, "selfish," appeared 3 times. I deleted both voicemails and examined texts. Ryan has sent 12 emails in 30 minutes. The first 2 were WTF and "Is this real?" They became longer. He questioned why I set them up if I was going to pull the rug right out from under them. He asked why I kept telling them others were paying when it was me. The last email showed the folder overview page with the total amount underlined and 3 question marks. The number on his screen grew as if viewing it made it true. $56,780 over 2.5 years. I paid that much to keep them afloat, but they called me selfish for not buying Ryan a laptop. I put my phone face down on the coffee table and opened my laptop. The autopay management page loaded slowly, showing all 14 autopay arrangements I had set up: electric bill, water, internet, both cell phone lines, Karen's car insurance, Ryan's marketplace health insurance, rent payment to their landlord. deducted from my checking account on different days of the month. I set the cancellation date to the end of the current payment month for each one. Most would renew in 4 weeks, some in 5. It took time. I wasn't mean, but the choice was final. Every time I canceled, a little email asked whether I was sure. Yes, I knew. I want to cancel this payment. Yes, I knew the service would end. Clenching my teeth so hard hurt my jaw at the end. The sun sank outside my window. I ate an unwanted lunch at the kitchen counter before sitting down and opening a new email. I said I would stop providing financial. I wrote more effortlessly than expected. Assistance at the conclusion of the current billing cycles, that they would need to contact each service provider to make payment arrangements, and that I would attach a list of account numbers and due dates. I was objective, no emotions, no accusations, just knowledge. All pupils needed to manage spending was on the spreadsheet. I proofread again, fixed an error, and pushed submit before second-guessing myself. I ignored many calls on my phone. The next morning seemed weird, like I had woken in another life. I worked, attended meetings, and checked email, but my mind was elsewhere. I phoned Tara from the parking lot during lunch. Second ring, she took up. I told her the whole story in one go. Hidden payments, birthday confrontation, shared files, cancellations, all of it. I enjoyed her quiet listening more than I realized. After I stopped talking, she was quiet. She said my actions were reasonable and probably excessively kind given how they had treated me for years. Hearing someone else say it calmed me. She inquired whether I calculated the whole amount, so I opened my phone spreadsheet. We both became silent when we saw the number. It was worth more than a decent car, a year's rent, plus all I'd saved in the preceding 2.5 years. I laughed for the first time in days when Tara whistled and mumbled something I won't repeat. I thanked her and went inside feeling stronger than I did that morning. Work was done, so I drove home half expecting my flat to look the same. Still, it felt weird. Like any other night, I put on comfy clothes and cooked leftovers. Someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Karen with mascara on her cheeks and tangled hair from rubbing. My stomach plummeted, but I opened the door 6 inches while staying in place. Her voice cracked with every sentence as she questioned how I could do this to them. I maintained my calm and told her we could talk after she analyzed the folder and made a plan, but not while she was so upset. She pushed forward, but I grabbed the door. She started the guilt trip by saying they were family and took care of each other, so I couldn't abandon them. The absurdity of her saying so after 20 years of calling me selfish struck me. I reminded her of the milkshake voucher, their lactose-intolerant birthday present, while I paid for their life. Although her cheeks became red, I was already closing the door quietly as she said. The lock clicked, and I waited for her footsteps down the corridor with my back against it. I sat there for a few minutes after she left, then went to my bedroom and muted my phone before bed. I slept in fits and starts, replaying the door talk. The phone lit up around 1 a.m. Ryan called, and I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. Speech was slurred and phrases flowed like he had been drinking. He said he didn't know and assumed Rick was paying rent. Karen said that Ryan's job paid the utilities. They lied about who paid what while I ran things behind the scenes. When I informed him I had been doing it for 2.5 years, the line was silent except for his breathing. He started crying, saying he felt terrible knowing what they called me while I helped them. I said we'd talk when he was sober and hung up before he could respond. I checked the property management company's website the next morning for contact information. I called the main office about a Maple Street rental unit. The woman who answered directed me to Cynthia, the local property manager, and I explained the problem without hysteria. I informed her that I had been making informal payments for my mother but would need to stop. Cynthia entered the account and asked for payment dates and amounts in a professional manner. She confirmed Karen's lease was in her name only, so she would have to discuss payment arrangements with the office if she fell behind. Cynthia thanked me for the heads up and said she would note my absence. Although the call lasted 10 minutes, my hands were shaking as I hung up. On my lunch break, I looked for family and financial therapists. I found Dr. Lewis with a 5-day availability while other places had weeks-long wait lists. Before I could stop myself, I booked it online and filled out the intake forms in my car. Just planning the appointment helped my chest relax, like I was finally taking action instead of reacting to anything they threw at me. A minute later, the confirmation email arrived with his office address and pre-session materials. Karen sent me a long text. Parent called me selfish while I paid their bills for years and gave me a milkshake, knowing I'm lactose intolerant. So I canceled all 14 auto pays. For 20 years my family has called me selfish. They had no idea that I had discreetly paid all their bills for 750 days. Was 10 when it started. My mother, Karen, told me to send 90 of my $120 yard sale proceeds to my brother Ryan, since keeping them would be selfish. That word followed me. Was your grade decent? Selfish for not teaching my sibling. Did I buy myself something nice? Selfish for neglecting family. My first stable job came 3 years ago. Karen called me crying the same week. They were banished. Ryan lost another job. Karen's boyfriend, Rick, left, and they needed $3,200 to avoid homelessness. But I know you won't help, she cried. You're too selfish to care if your own family becomes homeless. Weary of paying for anything and being selfish, I paid it behind their back without telling them. Everything fell apart on my 28th birthday. I arrived at their house thrilled since I had a passive income investment for my brother that would have offered years of stability. Ryan answered the door and remarked, "Finally. Did Mom tell you about my laptop situation? Instead of happy birthday?" I stared at him, confused. Rolling his eyes. He gazed at my empty palms. "My MacBook broke 4 months ago, and Mom said she'd tell you to get me a new one for your birthday." "You seriously forgot? How selfish can you be?" Karen joined him. "Your brother needs things, and you only think about yourself." They were standing at the entryway of the house I paid for, dressed in my clothes, about to eat my food, and calling me selfish. They didn't know. Karen posted her spa holiday photos last month. Ryan bought a new gaming setup while calling me selfish for 6 years of driving the same automobile. Mum remarked, "Your brother has just lost his job. How do you expect us to survive if you won't even help your own family?" If only they knew who'd been keeping them from the streets for 2.5 years. Suddenly they gave me my birthday present. Burger King offered a milkshake coupon. Lactose intolerance. They knew this. After 2.5 years of losing money, they gave me a coupon for something bad. Because I needed to breathe. I left first. While sitting in my car, clutching the steering wheel till my knuckles became white, I knew they would find out everything. As I returned up the driveway, my legs felt rubbery, but my mind was clear. "Hey Ryan," I said as he answered the door, my voice so calm it scared me. "Quick question. Who pays your phone bill?" He replied, Rick," as if I was ridiculous for asking. I could hear my heart racing in my ears. "Interesting. What about your gas, health insurance, those $120 weekend food deliveries?" His face changed. Confusion crept in. His grin wavered like a math equation gone wrong. "And Mom," I continued as she neared, my voice growing louder. "Who exactly pays the rent here? The car insurance? That electricity bill that's somehow never late?" The silence was awful. When they faced each other, I could see their thoughts laboring to piece together 2.5 years of lies. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then reopened like an ugly fish seeking oxygen. She said, "Wait," her cheeks turning dull. "But you said Ryan pays?" "And you told me Rick." Ryan's teen-like voice quivered. The awakening was sweet and dreadful. Their eyes opened, their faces white as paper, and I could see it hitting them like a punch. The selfish daughter they'd ridiculed, demanded, and insulted saved them. Every banknote. Every payment. Me. Karen's voice was quiet. "You've been..." I stopped her. I turned and left, leaving them at the doorway, their world shattered. When I turned to them, I smiled. "Oh, and Mom, I'm canceling everything. Unless you do me one favor." "I'll do anything," she pleaded. "Then meet at the link below, Mom." That's where the rest of this story is. I ran back to my car and grabbed my phone before changing my mind. When activating the cloud storage app, my shaky hands nearly dropped it twice. The folder, Family Expenses 2023 to 2025, had every receipt, bank statement, and auto-pay confirmation by month. I kept track of everything without knowing why. Maybe I knew this day was coming. The running total at the bottom knotted my gut. I clicked share, copied the URL, and sent Karen a fresh text. My heart raced against my ribs as my thumb hovered over the submit button for 10 seconds. When I tapped it, the phrase delivered displayed underneath the message. I started my car and drove away from their house, monitoring my rearview mirror like a criminal. 5 minutes later, my phone went crazy. The screen showed Karen's name first, then Ryan's. My steering wheel knuckles were white as I drove, sending every call to voicemail. Like an angry wasp in a jar, the phone buzzed in the cup holder. I arrived to my apartment building 25 minutes later with 9 missed calls and a ringing voicemail notice. After a minute of breathing in my parking spot, I grabbed my phone and went inside. My apartment seemed quieter, like the air had moved. I drank my water all at once, then filled it and sat on my couch. Voicemail stared at me from the screen. After drinking more water, I pushed play on the first. Karen shrieked in horror, wondering if this was true. Why didn't I tell them I paid for everything? How could I hide this? She spoke rapidly, so I didn't comprehend some. The message terminated at 90 seconds. The second voicemail arrived 30 minutes later, so I checked the clock. It was completely different. Her harsh voice accused me of lying and manipulating them by concealing everything. She stated I deliberately made them look silly to give them something to grasp onto. In a 2-minute remark, "selfish," appeared 3 times. I deleted both voicemails and examined texts. Ryan has sent 12 emails in 30 minutes. The first 2 were "WTF" and "Is this real?" They became longer. He questioned why I set them up if I was going to pull the rug right out from under them. He asked why I kept telling them others were paying when it was me. The last email showed the folder overview page with the total amount underlined and 3 question marks. The number on his screen grew as if viewing it made it true. $56,780 over 2.5 years. I paid that much to keep them afloat, but they called me selfish for not buying Ryan a laptop. I put my phone face down on the coffee table and opened my laptop. The auto-pay management page loaded slowly, showing all 14 auto-pay arrangements I had set up: electric bill, water, internet, both cell phone lines, Karen's car insurance, Ryan's marketplace health insurance, rent payment to their landlord, deducted from my checking account on different days of the month. I set the cancellation date to the end of the current payment month for each one. Most would renew in 4 weeks, some in 5. It took time. I wasn't mean, but the choice was final. Every time I canceled, a little email asked whether I was sure. Yes, I knew. I want to cancel this payment. Yes, I knew the service would end. Clenching my teeth so hard hurt my jaw at the end. The sun sank outside my window. I ate an unwanted lunch at the kitchen counter before sitting down and opening a new email. I said I would stop providing financial I wrote more effortlessly than expected. Assistance at the conclusion of the current billing cycles, that they would need to contact each service provider to make payment arrangements, and that I would attach a list of account numbers and due dates. I was objective, no emotions, no accusations, just knowledge. All pupils needed to manage spending was on the spreadsheet. I proofread again, fixed an error, and pushed submit before second-guessing myself. I ignored many calls on my phone. The next morning seemed weird, like I had woken in another life. I worked, attended meetings, and checked email, but my mind was elsewhere. I phoned Tara from the parking lot during lunch. Second ring, she took up. I told her the whole story in one go. Hidden payments, birthday confrontation, shared files, cancellations, all of it. I enjoyed her quiet listening more than I realized. After I stopped talking, she was quiet. She said my actions were reasonable and probably excessively kind given how they had treated me for years. Hearing someone else say it calmed me. She inquired whether I calculated the whole amount, so I opened my phone spreadsheet. We both became silent when we saw the number. It was worth more than a decent car, a year's rent, plus all I'd saved in the preceding 2.5 years. I laughed for the first time in days when Tara whistled and mumbled something I won't repeat. I thanked her and went inside feeling stronger than I did that morning. Work was done, so I drove home half expecting my flat to look the same. Still, it felt weird. Like any other night, I put on comfy clothes and cooked leftovers. Someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Karen with mascara on her cheeks and tangled hair from rubbing. My stomach plummeted, but I opened the door 6 inches while staying in place. Her voice cracked with every sentence as she questioned how I could do this to them. I maintained my calm and told her we could talk after she analyzed the folder and made a plan, but not while she was so upset. She pushed forward, but I grabbed the door. She started the guilt trip by saying they were family and took care of each other, so I couldn't abandon them. The absurdity of her saying so after 20 years of calling me selfish struck me. I reminded her of the milkshake voucher, their lactose-intolerant birthday present while I paid for their life. Although her cheeks became red, I was already closing the door quietly as she said. The lock clicked, and I waited for her footsteps down the corridor with my back against it. I sat there for a few minutes after she left, then went to my bedroom and muted my phone before bed. I slept in fits and starts, replaying the door talk. The phone lit up around 1 a.m. Ryan called, and I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. Speech was slurred and phrases flowed like he had been drinking. He said he didn't know and assumed Rick was paying rent. Karen said that Ryan's job paid the utilities. They lied about who paid what while I ran things behind the scenes. When I informed him I had been doing it for 2.5 years, the line was silent except for his breathing. He started crying, saying he felt terrible knowing what they called me while I helped them. I said we'd talk when he was sober and hung up before he could respond. I checked the property management company's website the next morning for contact information. I called the main office about a Maple Street rental unit. The woman who answered directed me to Cynthia, the local property manager, and I explained the problem without hysteria. I informed her that I had been making informal payments for my mother but would need to stop. Cynthia entered the account and asked for payment dates and amounts in a professional manner. She confirmed Karen's lease was in her name only, so she would have to discuss payment arrangements with the office if she fell behind. Cynthia thanked me for the heads up and said she would note my absence. Although the call lasted 10 minutes, my hands were shaking as I hung up. On my lunch break, I looked for family and financial therapists. I found Dr. Lewis with a 5-day availability while other places had weeks-long wait lists. Before I could stop myself, I booked it online and filled out the intake forms in my car. Just planning the appointment helped my chest relax, like I was finally taking action instead of reacting to anything they threw at me. A minute later, the confirmation email arrived with his office address and pre-session materials. Karen sent me a long text that afternoon about how she had sacrificed everything to raise us alone. I turned it around on her over money when she talked about working many jobs while we were young, losing her life and doing everything for her children. Paragraph after paragraph, she complained about my ungratefulness and how she couldn't believe her daughter would leave her family. I read it once, remembering Tara's advice to let her rage in an empty location until she was ready for a meaningful talk, and put my phone away without responding. She sent harsher messages every few hours, participate, including some I hadn't seen in months, because I knew they were empty. A spreadsheet showed my income, expenditures, excluding bills, and how much I could safely save each month. The findings were shocking and disappointing. Amazing because I could save money and live comfortably. Depressing because it showed how much I sacrificed my stability to keep them afloat. I could have had an emergency fund. They may have vacationed. If I chose, I could have upgraded my furniture or car. Instead, I lived paycheck to paycheck while others bought gaming gear and spa visits. 2 days later, Ryan surprised me with a note. I didn't sense an entitled edge in his voice, which was smaller and more real. He asked if we could address the investment opportunity I mentioned before things went wrong, acknowledging he made a mistake. He understood if I wasn't ready and supported my decision. I saved the message but didn't call back since I didn't know what to say. I didn't trust myself to have that chat without starting another fight since my anger was so raw. Cynthia phoned me at work the next day. Karen had asked Cynthia about payment choices in the office and was astonished to learn she was 4 months behind schedule. I covered the difference between Karen's belief and her actual debt. Suddenly the buffer disappeared. Cynthia suggested a formal discussion with all parties to identify liability and set a fair payment plan. She spoke professionally, but I could hear a trace of frustration, the tone of someone who had dealt with difficult tenants before and knew what to anticipate. I attended the meeting but stated that I was only an observer to absolve myself of financial responsibility. Cynthia said she understood and arranged it for the next week, allowing Karen time to get financial papers and face her situation. I accepted her email calendar invite with the date and time, knowing it would be unpleasant yet necessary. This has to be done officially with witnesses and documents to remove any doubt about my responsibility. 5 days after scheduling, my therapy appointment happened. A small professional building near downtown housed Dr. Lewis's office, which had beige walls and generic landscape paintings. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-40s, and had glasses and a calm manner that put me at ease quickly. I told him everything, even the selfish past, secret payments, and birthday fight. After listening without interrupting, he explained that hiding the donations was my way of avoiding their shame while yet feeling guilty about family chores. He taught me I kept my phone silent, and didn't. I opened my laptop that evening and checked all my bank accounts. Broken record approach for setting limits, which entails repeating a calm phrase when someone pushes back instead of arguing or making excuses. After that session, I felt like someone had told me to stop apologizing for self-care as I returned to my car. Karen emailed me asking if I could cover for a month while she acclimatized, saying she had applied for 3 jobs and needed time. I typed the identical script Dr. Lewis gave me in my car, adding that I knew it was hard, but my choice was clear and she needed to work with property management to make arrangements. I checked it again to make sure the tone was powerful but not harsh, then put my phone in my bag and drove home without waiting for her response. The property management meeting 4 days later was held in a cramped, stale coffee and copy paper smelling conference room. Cynthia sat at the head of the table with a thick folder, and Karen took the chair opposite me, wiping her eyes with a tissue before speaking. Ryan slouched in the corner seat, seeming smaller than usual, his leg jumping under the table with that childlike jitteriness. Cynthia opened the folder and read the lease papers in a calm, professional manner that made them appear real. She grabbed payment records from the past 2.5 years and pointed to the columns to say the account was 5 months behind since my payment stopped. Karen stared at me and Cynthia with 5 different emotions, from tears to wrath, as if one of us would explain this was all a mistake. Ryan watched the table, pulling at a loose thread on his sleeve. He seemed so young then, like he had regressed into the child who hid behind Karen when things got bad. Cynthia stated the figures simply. 5 months of back rent plus the current month, followed by direct monthly payments. No more mystery donors will fill gaps. After she finished, only Karen's sniffling and the fluorescent lights overhead broke the heavy, awful quiet. While everyone watched, I wrote $2,200 in my checkbook, which I'd brought for this occasion. My hand held solid despite my heart racing. I paid the property management company directly. Not to Karen or Ryan, but to the building owner. I slid it across the table to Cynthia and explained in the same calm voice I'd used with Dr. Lewis that this was a one-time transition payment to help them catch up if they signed up for a formal payment plan today and transferred all utilities into their own names within 1 week. Cynthia checked the check, then pulled out a payment plan agreement from her folder and entered the dates and amounts. Karen grabbed for the check, but Cynthia moved it to her side of the table and explained that it would be kept in escrow until all requirements were met, making this formal and binding rather than just another family promise that might be broken. Karen's face transformed when she understood this wasn't free money. There were actual boundaries and repercussions. Karen shrieked and argued that $2,200 was insufficient, that they needed more time, and that I was being unkind and unfair after everything she had done for me. Her hands shook as she pointed to Cynthia's papers figures to show that the amount was difficult to handle. Cynthia interrupted her mid-sentence, slipping her professional mask to show that she had dealt with difficult renters and was not buying the sham. She stated, strong but not harshly, that $2,200 plus a structured payment plan was more than generous considering the circumstances, that most landlords would have already started eviction procedures, and that this was their chance to put things right before legal action. Ryan said they would take it and figure out the rest for the first time since we sat down, his voice low but clear. He looked at Karen like they'd been fighting about who should pay what and why no one had noticed the bills were paid. Ryan shook his head and took Cynthia's pen while Karen protested. His face made Karen slump, the fight abandoning her as she realized she had no other options. I saw them sign the payment plan agreement while I sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and anguish as they took responsibility for their life. That evening, when I was making dinner in my apartment, my phone buzzed with family group chat notifications I had forgotten about. Karen sent a long letter to every aunt, uncle and cousin, accusing me of abandoning them in their hour of need after she had given everything to raise me. Each message about how selfish I was and how families should be together was more dramatic than the last. But I saw this coming a mile away, and I'd already written my letter to the important relatives, the ones who'd known me from childhood and may listen to my side. I quickly stated that I had helped them financially for 2.5 years but wanted to focus on my own security. Simply spoken fact, nothing special or accusatory. I received several supportive or neutral remarks on my phone throughout the evening, expressing their sympathy or hope that we might resolve things. Some others wrote me private messages wondering whether I was okay, which I appreciated more than mediation. I didn't care about those who believed Karen's theatrics, and most people could see through it. Next morning at work, my desk phone rang with an odd internal extension while I was perusing a report. I picked it up and heard Karen's voice, which shocked me because she had never called my office and didn't have my direct number. She started the guilt trip immediately, loud enough for my cubicle neighbor to notice, and I realized she must have called the main number and been transferred through. She kept phoning, getting louder and more desperate when I respectfully informed her I couldn't speak during work hours. After 30 seconds, my phone rang again, and I was worried about making a commotion when HR's Ethan arrived at my cubicle entry. The receptionist had apparently informed him, as the same number had repeatedly called to be connected to me. I explained the situation as quickly as possible, feeling humiliated, but Ethan nodded and made notes on his iPad. He told me he was writing this in my file and that the firm would respect my limits and call building security if she kept contacting me at work. It was a comfort to have an official record proving this wasn't family drama, but real harassment my employer took seriously. Ryan texted me that afternoon, asking for help with his resume since he was searching for a decent warehouse job. The letter was courteous and requested practical help without guilt or demands. Instead of hiding his uneven career history, I emailed him a simple resume template I had maintained for years and advised him to emphasize reliability and enthusiasm to learn. I answered his question concisely and gave him crucial information without being a caretaker. Helping him help himself rather than offering him unfavorable responses seems right. He instantly said thank you and made no additional demands, a change from typical chats. Part of me wondered whether the property management meeting's reality check had made him realize he needed to try this time rather than depending on others. Karen left a message later that evening, which I almost deleted before listening to, but curiosity won out and I played it. She said I was selfish and ungrateful. I couldn't break the word's curse for 20 years. She explained how she had sacrificed her life to raise me and Ryan, how I owed her everything, and how I could be so cruel after everything she had done. Listening to her wrath, something seemed different. The word selfish bounced off my ears instead of sinking in. In my mind from our prior session, Dr. Lewis told me that limitations were not selfish but necessary for life. Before finishing, I deleted the mail. I didn't regret it. I didn't feel obligated to contact her to explain my actions. Instead of describing me, the phrase had become a sound she made when she didn't get what she wanted. I searched my junk drawer for the additional key to their house, which I'd had since I was 17 and used to get myself in when Karen called with an emergency. As I grasped the key, I remembered all the times I'd used it to feed them, fix anything broken, or check on them. The metal felt warm. I found a little envelope and note card and wrote a simple message saying that we should take time to adjust to the new arrangement. My boundaries were clearly stated, nothing harsh or exceptional. It seemed strange to drop it in the mailbox on my way to the grocery store, as if I was abandoning years of obligation. The key dropped into the envelope with a slight clinking sound, and I stood with my palm on the mailbox lid, feeling lighter than in months. 2 days later, Ryan called, sounding afraid rather than entitled, maybe for the first time since we were youngsters. He needed advice after the warehouse interview, his voice rising at the end of his statements like he was pleading. I advised him to be honest about his work experience but stress what he'd learned from failed jobs and how he was looking for stability and ready to commit long term. Listening without interrupting and asking follow-up questions showed he was sincere. I sensed a new maturity in his voice. I wondered whether rock bottom had woken him awake. We discussed warehouse work and interviewing for 10 minutes. I felt okay about the conversation when we hung up, like if our relationship didn't require daily rescue. The energy provider confirmed via email that Karen and Ryan had requested transfers for my accounts over the following few days. At least things were moving forward, but bureaucratic paperwork and verification would take another week. I verified each account and made sure my auto-pay cancellations were still set for the end of the billing cycle, double-checking the dates to avoid misunderstanding. I then changed all my passwords to random characters and numbers they couldn't guess and saved them in a password manager so they couldn't restart anything without my authorization. Each account I safeguarded felt like another lock, keeping my bounds and preventing them from guilting or manipulating my pocketbook. Without the automated deductions, my bank account balance looked different, so I put some money in my savings account to see if it would rise instead of emptying it for emergencies. In my second therapy session, Dr. Lewis gave me a blank journal and asked me to write down childhood examples of selfishness. Sitting in his office, the pen hovered over the paper. I wrote about making $120 at the yard sale when I was 10, and having to contribute $90 to Ryan since keeping my money would be selfish. I remembered being 13 with straight A's and Karen calling me selfish for not coaching Ryan instead of studying. I filled 3 pages with memories that followed a pattern I'd never seen before. Every time I was called selfish, I had something others wanted, not because I was mean. Dr. Lewis nodded carefully as he reviewed my work before questioning me about I told him I was selfish only when I had money, good grades, time, or tendency. Anything else I might lose. He highlighted selfish on each sheet and asked what it meant and how it was used against me at the bottom. As I walked back to my car after the session, my brain felt like a jigsaw piece had finally fit after years of being in the incorrect position. I received a text from Karen 2 days later. She emailed an image of an overdue utility notice with, "Is this what you wanted?" in all capitals. The electricity bill was $372 late and due next week, according to the warning. The message made me experience the stomach twist Dr. Lewis warned me about. He called it the conditioned response, automatic guilt that arose whenever they created a circumstance. I wrote 3 responses, deleted them, and closed the message without answering. The humiliation weighed on me like a mountain, yet I didn't apologize or pay. I returned to work and focused on my tasks, not their emergency. Cynthia phoned me that afternoon while I sorted desk files. Despite her misgivings about being in this circumstance, she told me Karen had come and signed the payment plan. Cynthia's dry, weathered voice indicated that she had dealt with unpleasant renters and doubted Karen's victimhood. She said Karen kept blaming me for putting her in poverty, but Cynthia slammed the payment agreement over the desk and urged her to sign or risk eviction. Karen signed. Cynthia confirmed that the utility transfer paperwork will be completed next week. I thanked her for her professionalism and communication. She said there was no problem and will email me final confirmation when everything was transferred out of my name. My bank account showed the $2,200 escrow payment I'd committed to help them transition. Cynthia verified the signatures, and utility transfers began. I paid the property management company. I felt like 2.5 years were squeezing my fingers as I filled out the sum with the pen. This was the last payment I sent them, the last in a long succession that had destroyed my cash and left me living simply while they lived luxuriously. I signed the check's bottom and sent it to Cynthia's office. Dropping it in the outgoing mail at work felt sad and liberated, like closing a long open door. Ryan texted me a photo 4 days later. He looked exhausted but confident in a warehouse, wearing a bright yellow safety jacket and work boots. Text said, "Day 1 done," with a thumbs up emoji. No one asked for money or complained about the work. After zooming in, his face looked more mature, as if having to sustain himself had aged him positively. I replied that I was proud of him and asked how things went. He complained it hurt his feet, but his supervisor believed he performed well. After a few more texts about the position, the discussion concluded without him asking for anything. I felt a fracture in my rage toward him. Not forgiveness, but maybe the start of it. Next morning, Karen posted on social media. A mysterious statement about finding your true family in trying times caught my eye while browsing during my coffee break. In her passive-aggressive tone to beg compassion, she obviously addressed me without saying my name. The post got 15 family and friend responses urging her to be strong and asking what happened. My fingers hovered over the reply button, anxious to explain the story and reveal who paid their expenses. However, Dr. Lewis had said that I was not required to alter her account. I muted her accounts to hide her posts on my feed. Those who didn't know the whole story may believe anything, but those who did would listen to me. Utility provider emails started arriving days later. Each confirmed that my name was removed from another account and billing was changed to Karen or Ryan. I received confirmations for energy, water, gas, internet, and garbage service, which I was paying for without knowing. I screenshotted each email and stored them to a new Boundaries 2025 folder on my PC. These proved I had left their financial situation. If anybody questioned anything I did or didn't help with, I have dated confirmation emails showing when I stopped and what I paid for. Personal communication from a previous neighborhood buddy came later that week. She saw Karen's unclear social media remark and wanted to check on my family. I liked that she asked privately rather than escalating the situation. I briefly explained that I had been helping them financially but wanted to focus on my own security. I avoided discussing selfishness or hidden payments to be neutral and accurate. She seemed to understand and wanted a good ending. The discourse ended without judgment or need to elaborate. When I say that, most people realize that you have to take care of yourself even when your family needs you. I set up an automatic transfer from my bank account to savings with each paycheck that day. It was only $60 twice a month, but it was mine now. In the following weeks, I watched my savings account grow in ways I never could while supporting 3 people on one wage. The number rose from 900 to 1,000 to 1,200. It wasn't much, but it felt huge since it was mine. The emergency fund account on my banking app made me proud every time I checked it. Saving for my own needs rather than theirs was meant to look like this. Ryan texted me again a month after starting warehouse job. He asked if we might reconsider investing in a few months if he proved his capacity to stay. I read the message 3 times and noticed that he was setting criteria rather than demanding immediate help. He wanted to show his work ethic before asking me to invest in his future. I told him we could chat again after 7 months of steady work and gave him a timetable and goal. He said that was fair and will contact me later. The money chat seemed more like 2 people discussing a business transaction than me being guilted into bailing him out of another disaster. 4 days later, while reviewing project files at my work, my phone rang with a local area code from a stranger. Assuming it was a vendor or IT representative calling regarding the system upgrade, I responded and said hello in my professional voice. Karen's voice exploded before I could understand, diving into how she'd been trying to reach me. Didn't I care that she was struggling? How could I leave them when they needed me most? My stomach dropped, but I remembered Dr. Lewis's broken record technique and took a long breath before saying that while I understood she was unhappy, my choice was certain. I repeated, I realized she was angry, but my option was clear. She kept talking over me about Ryan's troubles, the rising costs, and how selfish I was. She started crying and wondering what to do next, and I repeated it calmly. I knew she was unhappy, but my choice